Understand?
I think if we just
Right, reconnecting.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Our candidates. Unless they get out of order.
So just get rid of it, delete the other one.
Does everyone
That's what I'm
pretty much understand this? Now, I can assure you, moving
We
in
gotta connect your phone to my house.
didn't have this much trouble. They had 6 debates, 2 hours each, over several weeks. There are too many of you. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Jeff Ballinger, and Here. Okay. Minute starts now. I'm Jeff Ballinger. I'm from Andover, and I married an immigrant from a Muslim country. And in Donald Trump's America, we may never have met, but thankfully, it was 25 years ago. I am an activist and longtime labor person, and I'll tell you what about this National Grid strike. They are a rapacious corporation. They made $6 billion last year, and that's a profit, and they want to cut healthcare benefits.
Is this on? It is. I'm Alexander Chandler, I live in Haverhill, and I'm running because I'm the best candidate to get things done to improve the quality of life for working and middle-class people like myself and like all of you, and democracy. The reason for that is that I spent 13 years in the intelligence community tackling our toughest challenges: Iran, North Korea, weapons of mass destruction. I was there when intelligence started to come in about the Russian interference in our election. And what I also have is experience in community healthcare and a vision to improve our daily lives. What I'll also say is that I'm powered by you. The median donation to our campaign is $27. Big money is so often the enemy of big ideas. Big money has nothing on me. So if you elect me to Congress, I will take your concerns, this vision with me, and be undeterred for forth. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. Ooh, there we go. Okay, my name is Beach Doss. I'm a constitutional lawyer. I'm a small business owner and now a congressional candidate. I started this journey actually well before I did myself. My dad came to the United States in 1964 with $8 in his pocket and has built the American dream for all of us. I'm here to help protect that American dream. I will tell you a little story, and I'll try to do it very quickly. When my hotel closed down because of a flood in 2016, it was closed for 6 months. We paid all salaries and health care for that period. I didn't have a dime coming in. So we have our friends here, Bob and Chris, right in the front here with National Grid. It's not a strike. They were locked out by a corporation that illegally has locked them out. Let's discuss that. And we'll talk about that today. Thank you very much. My name is Beach Doss. I ask for your support. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Rufus Gifford. I honestly never thought that I would be standing here in Hudson asking for your support to be your next congressperson. But I want to tell you a little bit about my story. So my life changed firstly on January 3rd, 2007. That was the day I met a young African-American senator named Barack Obama. And when I met him, I had about a 30-second conversation with him, and I knew that I was going to devote the next 2 years of my life trying to elect him president of the United States. And I had no idea that those 2 years would turn into 10. And that takes me to why I am running. While working for President Obama, I helped do things like help pass the Affordable Care Act, overturn Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The last 4 years of the Obama administration, I had the great privilege of serving the United States overseas as an ambassador. While I was an ambassador, I worked with the chief negotiator of the Paris Climate Agreement. I had the distinct responsibility to go into a foreign government and actually ask a foreign minister or a defense minister to send their troops into harm's way. In my mind, that kind of experience is what I want to bring to this role in Washington. Thank you so much. I look forward to discussing these ideas.
Good evening. I'm Len Golder. I'm an attorney. I live in Stowe, and I have 28 years of experience in local government. And with that experience, I've learned to deal with just about every issue, whether it's education, the environment, housing, inclusion. Every one of those issues translates on the national level. And when you're in a capacity, say like on the planning board, you don't win friends and influence people very easily, but you have to make some tough decisions. You have to be inclusionary, even if people in abutting neighbors don't particularly like change. You have to be willing to promote change. I've learned how to get together with people to form coalitions with people who disagree. I've learned how to take stands when I had to, when other people would not agree. I mentioned last time, I'll mention it again, my two role models in government are those two U.S. senators who voted against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which was the declaration of war for Vietnam. That's the kind of courage and conviction I will bring if I'm elected to the Congress.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Barbara L'Italian, and I am a mom on a mission. That mission took me into enemy territory yesterday as I went on Fox and Friends. I started out in politics in my 40s as a mother of four because of my son with autism. His name is Rudy. He's 28 years old. I realized that I needed to be an advocate on his behalf and did so in many ways, and realized I was a pretty damn good advocate, and took my skills to the State House to work on behalf of so many children and take that on your behalf down in Washington. Be able to advocate on behalf of all of you, and I'm sure we will talk about this evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bopa Malone. I am running because I'm blessed. I love making a difference, and I want to make sure that everyone has the freedom to achieve the American dream the way that I had. I came here as a refugee when I was 9, having nothing but the clothes on my back and knowing no English at all. My parents taught me the values of hard work and persistence, but I knew that we didn't make that alone. We couldn't have made that and make it alone. It was because of good people in my corner. That's why I was able to get a good education, was able to go to work, become a vice president at Enterprise Bank, helping families get into their homes and building their businesses, going back to Cambodia to build a school for underprivileged children, and becoming a community activist by serving people. I have been serving for people for over 10 years. I've been very effective at it, and when in Congress, I will continue to do that. I want to be able to help everyone achieve their American dream, and thank you for being here tonight to learning about us.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Juana Matias. I'm the state representative for the 16th Essex District, the city of Lawrence, and it is a pleasure to be here with all of you tonight. I'm running to represent the 3rd Congressional District because working and middle-class families deserve someone who understands firsthand the challenges they face. This district is my home. I immigrated with my family in 1992 at the age of 5 from the Dominican Republic, and we settled in Haverhill, Massachusetts. And because of my parents' determination and relentless sacrifices, I had the opportunity to dream bigger. Graduate from UMass Boston in Suffolk Law, paying my way through school with loans, scholarships, and part-time work. And after college, I did not leave this district. I returned to be of service as a social worker, as a Justice AmeriCorps advocate, and then today as Lawrence's state representative. I'm running to represent this district because there's too much at stake for us to sit by while our country and our communities are represented by an administration and president who do not prioritize working class issues. None of these issues are theoretical for me, and if given the opportunity to represent you, I would be a tireless voice for the issues that we need solutions for. I look forward to hearing your questions, and I thank you for this opportunity.
Good evening. thanks for having us back. My name is Lori Trahan. My dad was a union iron worker. I grew up in a union household and I went to Lowell Public Schools. I too am fighting for the families that I grew up with. Families who live paycheck to paycheck and who are getting harmed by this Congress not working on their behalf. My priorities are those of the people who live in this district: prescription drug prices, affordable health care, good education, and jobs. I will fight for working class families, unions, women, veterans, seniors, our environment, our immigrants. Look, there are a lot of people who have moved into this district to run, and there's a lot of money being raised in this race. If there's one thing I could leave you with, I reject corporate PACs, money from corporate PACs, money from special interest lobbyists. I can show no better way than that I'm in this for you by raising the majority of our support from people who live in this district, people who want a representative who understands them. I'm in this for you. I thank you for coming again to hear about us, and I'll look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Before I begin, I do want to take one moment on a moderator's privilege. Over the past 7 months, I've gotten to know every one of these people. Not deeply personally, but I've gotten to know them. And I think I can express a common observation on the part of many people that we are inordinately blessed with qualified candidates in this election, regardless of who's elected. That said, the first question will go to Beach Doss. And Beach, your question number 7. It is commonly believed that high inflation is bad. I'm doing the best I can, sorry. That high inflation is bad for the long-run stability of the economy. Some people argue that rates are one thing and that balanced budgets and deficits are another, and that they don't matter, according to our former vice president. What are your thoughts on rising interest rates, balanced budgets, or the concept that deficits don't matter?
Kirk, how long do I have to answer this question?
A minute 30 seconds.
A minute and 30. Wow. Okay. I'm going to get a little meter there.
Don't be exchanged. You can elaborate as you go.
Okay. Well, deficits do matter. Okay. First of all, and you asked about inflation. Obviously, inflation is a bad thing to have in an economy. I don't see any time. So is that it's a
Well, then you obviously aren't living.
Hold on, I'll get
This could be a while. Okay, so inflationary pressures are obvious. Do I wait?
No, follow his flags.
I'm going to follow his flag. So the green means unlimited time.
Yeah.
Go. Okay. Inflationary pressures are obviously bad on an economic system, so they must be maintained at a level that's fairly low. But deficits, whether they're budget deficits or in my case, trade deficits. I think about trade all the time because I'm the one candidate up here that has consistently been against NAFTA and TPP. I believe that free trade is a problem. I believe that balanced trade is what we're looking for. Balanced trade means that if China sells us a phone, we sell them the equivalent amount of good or invest in their economy at an equivalent level. Tesla recently just was the first company to make an investment where more than 50% is now owned by Tesla. That has been a major problem. Jeff talks about it all the time, but it's been a major problem because we've lost a lot of intellectual property to China. I'm still green, so I'm still going. This could be a long answer. So fundamentally, I look at the economy and I say, well, what are we going to do in the future? Now there's a flight, there's no time, this is great. Fundamentally, the economy has to be stronger, right? We need an economy that works for us all. What does that mean? 30 seconds, okay. What does that mean? That means we need to have a strong manufacturing base, which we've lost. Again, we've lost it because Paul Tsongas used to say, if we are going to have an economy where we apply our natural resources and flip burgers, we'll still have an economy, but it will be one of diminished scale and scope. I fundamentally believe that. We need to manufacture, innovate, and do a lot of things in America that we no longer do because we've exported those jobs abroad. Thank you. Sorry for the rambling response.
And I can do whatever with this time. Yeah. Well, yeah, so it's a lot to respond to. I actually do take Bijan on the concept of good, strong trade deals, but I don't think I can answer that question in 30 seconds. I hope I get more time to answer that question, because this is something I've worked on quite a bit. But ultimately, this is about responsible fiscal policy to me. This is ultimately about revenue. And what we're seeing from the Trump administration is a tax bill that we saw passed in the early part of this year, which is a giveaway to the wealthiest Americans and corporations. We cut the corporate rate too low, and the wealthiest Americans are not paying their fair share. So that, at the same time, we are increasing things like defense spending. So this obviously leads to deficits that are uncontrollable. And simply, this is just irresponsible fiscal policy. And honestly, what I say to them is, we got to elect Democrats. When's the last time we had a balanced budget? We had a Democratic president. And under the Obama administration, we were much closer to having a balanced budget than we are right now. So that's, I hope, mostly what I'm supposed to do in my 30 seconds. Good enough, okay.
Mr. Ballinger, do you wish to, excuse me, Mr. Doss gets a chance to respond to that, then Mr. Ballinger, my mistake.
Again, Rufus and I disagree on trade. Let me tell you what the disagreement is. The disagreement is, should we have unlimited trade deficits, right? Fundamentally, when China, look at our phones, look at each one of your phones, right? Not one of them can be made here in the United States anymore. That's a problem. And fundamentally, if we start making things again, right, we'll have an economy that has manufacturing at its base. Again, it's not about not letting other countries trade with us. It's about saying, if you sell me $1, I'll sell you $1. That.
Thank you. I think you're wrong about TPP and NAFTA. I've opposed both, so you're not the only one up here that has opposed both. And being a labor person, I knew from the get-go that things were bad before NAFTA. As soon as that shipping container was invented, those jobs were gone. It wasn't bad trade deals, it was bad corporations. American corporations just lit out as fast as they could to find the cheapest labor they could, and the dictators that would bust unions, and that's where they started to ship into the United States from. So that's our trade deficit, writ small.
Mr. Doss, response?
You know, I'm going to yield my time to Rufus.
No, it's okay. I just think, listen, I think we oversimplify. I do think we oversimplify. We can't be lumping all trade deals into one category. I fully agree that we need to reopen NAFTA right now. I think this is a trade deal that needs to be re-looked at. I don't think that it's fully fair. That being said, I do believe that I worked on something called TTIP, which is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. This is something that was a free trade deal between the US and the EU. This is about, this was about creating our free-flowing economies between each other and actually lifting, what we call having a raising tide, lifting all ships. So actually raising labor and environmental standards globally. That was the concept behind this. And if we had gotten it done right, which we didn't finish, it would have been a great thing, I think. I'm sorry.
Mr. Goldberg? No, all of them get to go in the number they were drawn.
These are 1 minute responses, right?
What?
These are 1 minute responses.
That's 30 to 45 seconds.
30.
First of all, I disagree with you about trade associations. It's actually trade associations like NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific that are actually keeping inflation down. And we don't have a problem with inflation right now. What we have is, in certain core areas like the energy sector, yes, prices are high, and that's because we're dependent upon foreign oil. But as far as the overall economy, it's very important that we have a Trans-Pacific, because if we don't, those countries in the Pacific are going to ally themselves with China. We're going to lose them not only as economic allies, but potentially as military allies. A big problem in this economy right now, though, is not inflation, it's stagnant wages. And for that, we do need some tax incentives. Not to the wealthy, I agree, but to those who are working people, to give them tax cuts, to stimulate the economy, to create more demand for jobs.
Mr. Dodds, respond?
Here's the problem I have with Lenny's analysis, and fundamentally trade is, if there's a multivariate analysis in any equation, there are scientists here that will tell this to you better than I will, but if you have one variable, you can solve for it. So if you have multiple variables, so NAFTA is multiple countries, so there's no way of actually seeing, well, Canada and Mexico are selling us X or Y. It's too complicated. It's much better when you have balanced trade, where you say, listen, if we get X from Canada, we sell them the same number of goods. And that, if we had done that with China, we would not have lost most of our intellectual property. American companies wouldn't have had that ability to do so. Where does it go?
Do you have a question for Mr. Dodds or a response?
It's my turn?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thanks. I think one of the reasons why you have so many moms on the stage is because we care about the future that we're going to leave to our children. So I think a lot about the deficit, the fact that our deficit is going to hit the trillion mark 2 years ahead of schedule. That grates on all of us. We need to reform our tax policy. We have to get back to a place where everyone is paying their share, so that we're not giving the biggest tax cuts to the rich, and we're actually helping working class families again in this country.
Mr. Dodds, respond? Yeah, I told you to get
I'm not sure how it keeps coming back to me. Does anyone else want to speak on this question? Okay, all right. Well, yeah, I think I'm going to move on, because I think I've said enough on trade, and I think look, on deficits and inflation, healthcare, right? That's what we should focus on. Healthcare costs are rising too fast, and unfortunately, that's our biggest problem. So inflation is affecting in healthcare expenses is where I would focus. So we need universal coverage. People should be off. Like again, the National Grid employees were locked out. Why was it such a critical thing for them to be locked out? Because National Grid cut off their health care. Imagine working for a company for 30 years and then suddenly your health care is gone. That's crazy.
Actually is also a tool by which the government allocates resources. So you would imagine that in wealthier communities, people respond to the census quite well, and in much higher numbers. In lower income communities, that number will be depressed if they disincentivize it. So frankly, this has to be nonpartisan, it has to be above board, and I now have like 15 more minutes to talk, so I will hand over the microphone to my friend Ethan and respond a bit later.
Maybe I'll stay seated. Is everyone okay with that, or do I think I'll move this along a little faster. Listen, I think Rufus is right. This one's a no-brainer. Census should be non-politicized. The Trump administration has done a lot of things, but by taking functions that should be ministerial and administrative and making them political, we're doing a lot of damage. Look at his attack on the FBI. Look at his attack on the judiciary. Those are things that we need to a full state. And I think 766,000 is a lot of people to represent. We'll try to do it faithfully.
I would just say briefly, because I don't think I fully finished the thought, that census is used as a tool by which the federal government at times allocates resources. And that means that we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that it's accurate. And any time that there is an attempt to politicize this tool is literally a slap in the face of democracy as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, excuse me. Mr. Goldberg, any questions or comments? Excuse me, Mr. Ballinger.
Yeah, I'm certainly worried about this census, and I think it's not a country of origin issue, it's a citizenship question that they seek to add to this, and that's going to really depress the response rate. And I'm also concerned about the way they're going to go about it, because the plan is to rely much more on the web than they have in the past, and not as much with canvassers, not as much door-to-door. And, the non-English speaking families or families that didn't grow up speaking English are not as active on the web by 40% than the more well-off counterparts, English speakers, as their birth language. So I'm really concerned this is going to be a terrible outcome.
Okay, any response?
Just again, really briefly, it's actually a question that Jeff mentions. It reminds me, it's also a question about funding. As they try to be more automated and moving it to the web, that means they're actually trying to save money. And I think they are using this excuse of budget constraints as a way to depress participation in the census.
Mr. Goldberg.
I agree with the comments that have been made so far. I think we should keep 435 representatives, but add Puerto Rico, District of Columbia. I would also add the other territories as well, the Virgin Islands, Samoa, Guam, all these entities should have representation.
If the timers will give me a second, let me just, and not to interrupt your time.
Sure.
I don't know if the members are aware that there has been no change in the number of the members of the House since 1929. And if any territories or new states come in, that same 435 will be then divided up among the additional states. Just keep that in mind as you answer the question. Go ahead.
On the census, the question about citizenship and where you were born, it's a definite devious way of politicizing the whole process. It should be eliminated. The other part of the question, though, I wanted to refer to has to do with this whole issue about redistricting. It should be standard across the country. If we have redistricting, it should be once every time the census comes out across the country. And the other issue is it should be done by an independent commission. It should not be done by politics, for political gain within each of the congressional delegations.
Here, here.
Mr. Head, question or comment?
I was just going to expound on the redistricting. Look, the way we've been drawing our congressional lines has been nothing short of corrupt, and both parties have been guilty of it in this country. We have to get back to a place where we are electing or appointing an independent commission to take this process, which determines so much in our government, and we have to put them into independent commissions and independent bodies. I like what I'm seeing. We're seeing a lot of pushback in states like Michigan, trying to, doing what they can to get a 2/3 constitutional convention, and that just shows me how engaged everyone is, rowing in the same direction to take back our government, take back our country. So I think this is the year to do it. You disagree with me?
I definitely do not. No, I would just say, look, there's very few reasons to be excited or optimistic about any judicial ruling that we've had this year, but I will say the one that came out of Pennsylvania that actually called into question that Pennsylvania congressional districts was really something to get excited about, because honestly, that is the way that they had divided those congressional districts in Pennsylvania was truly a slap in the face of democracy. So it's a step in the right direction. Let's see it in state after state after state after state.
One, to disagree in part about expanding the size of Congress. I think it's something that we should study and look at. Because if you look at other national governments around the world, you look at other Western democracies, France, the UK, Canada, they have larger numbers of representatives in many cases. And I think it would bring government closer to the people as more the framers intended. And anything that can enhance participation in the process, I think we need to do that. Nonpartisan commissions, Congress has power to mandate that, I think, as a condition of seating members of the House. I would also say ranked choice voting, because then voters' true preferences are reflected when they're voting. And I think this is a basket of reforms, pro-democracy and anti-corruption, that I'll talk about more later. Thank you.
I'll pass.
You'll pass, all right. Ms. Malone, question or comment or whatever?
Yeah, I think right now the system is unfair and it benefits more of the wealthy, and the wealthy makes more of the decision. In working with a lot of people in the greater Lowell area, I know that people are scared to answer census questions. And also, I'm open to having more representatives. In doing this for, I'm running, and in doing this for 9 to 10 months, I feel like I haven't been able to go throughout the district yet. And how do you represent people in 2 years and really listen to them if you don't really go to them? So I think it's better to have less people and you really do the job. And we need to take money out of the campaigns as well. I say this all the time. It's every prediction is based on money and how much you can raise, where it gets rid of good people that have been working hard in the community, doing good in their community, but they don't have a chance to represent and continue to make a difference because of the fact that they represent lower income communities. So I would get rid of the money, make it public, and allow and make it less. I'm open to having more representatives to be able to serve better. Thank you.
Ms. Battalion, your question or comment?
I'm going to focus on two things. Redistricting. It was outrageous what happened after the last redistricting at the last 2010 mark. This entire country to figure out how they could flip leadership within every state house so that they could draw those lines. We saw what happened in Texas, where people bravely fled the state trying to show their outrage. Redistricting really matters. I believe that we should have independent commissions with regard to redistricting, and I've been a co-sponsor of a bill like that over the years when I've served in the House and in the Senate. And additionally, I filed a bill called the 2020 Census Reform this year in the Senate, recognizing that, in fact, the Republicans by design will want to underfund, will not want to have canvassers out, will want to undercount the vote in communities of color in the Northeast. And so I actually filed a bill to try to make sure that our state tries to augment what we need to be able to go out and get an accurate count. And I absolutely agree, this is by design. People that don't have access to a computer are not going to be able to know about this. They're going to be afraid because of the citizenship question. Take a look at the bill I filed. I think it would go a long way towards helping our state, because it also affects our funding for seniors. It's a formula grant for seniors, as well as our congressional delegation. Okay, if we're undercounted, we'll have fewer Congress people. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, the proposal by this administration with the census is one thing. It's racist. The census is supposed to count people, not people based on your citizenship status or your permanent residency status, people. Because a lot of the federal grant programs are funded based on this. So it's shameful that this is what this administration wants to do, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen. And I've been proud in the Massachusetts State House to support initiatives that are trying to ensure that we are going to stand for our values. And when it comes to redistricting, we absolutely need to support independent commissions. When you have people who have an interest at hand redistricting and drawing what a district looks like, we're not going to create what we need to see. So for me, this is where I stand on both of these issues, and it's been disheartening to see what this administration's been doing.
I'll take this last moment to just say this, because we've talked a lot about the concept of participation. If you've been following my campaign at all, I talk a lot about trust. That we desperately need to build trust back into the system. And I think one of the reasons why people are so skeptical of government, skeptical of politicians, is because they see their congressional maps divvied up in a way that's hyper-partisan. Ultimately, we got to do this in a fair way. If we do this in a fair way, if we make people believe in the system again in a nonpartisan way, maybe, just maybe, we can get more people not voting. We have a historically low voter turnout, and we simply must do that. We've got to get more people participating in our democracy. Thanks.
Mr. Ballinger, you get question 3. Well, no, your question, being number 3, question, sorry. You did draw question 8, sorry. I'll be glad for this. With Massachusetts and other states moving to a $15 minimum wage, or in some places what some would call a living wage, some organizations have pushed back claiming this will harm small businesses, prevent teens from landing their first minimum wage job as a result. Do you agree with this assessment? If not, what is your counter argument? Should this be done solely at the federal level? Should the minimum wage be indexed to inflation?
I would say indexing to inflation, definitely. But as far as a nationwide federal $15 minimum wage, I don't think so. I think that would harm small businesses in very poor states. I don't think it's across the board kind of answer. But what I would put in its place is we don't have wage stagnation. We have union busting. That's what we have in this country. We've had it since I was organizing in 1970s and 80s. The textile workers, this is when the wage gap started, when the 20% started to go up and the 80% go down, when we couldn't organize workers anymore. Sure, a lot of good jobs left the United States, but how hard have these workers in fast food tried to organize? How hard? They've been out on the streets in 100 cities in the United States, but you think any boss would deal with them? Any boss would bargain with them? They can't form a union. And, you know, farm workers just don't have any protection of the National Labor Relations Act. This is a travesty in a country that should be progressing on labor rights. That's the way you raise wages. You get unions easier to form, and you can have better wages. That's the way it should be done. But we're backtracking not only on labor rights, but also our democracy. Can you believe voter suppression? The Republicans are doing voter suppression across the country because they know it's the only way they can win. So I'm in favor of boosting the power of unions, getting it back to where it's a level playing field.
Mr. Doss, your question or comment?
Thank you, Jeff. Fundamentally, I agree. A nationwide, national $15 minimum wage will hurt small businesses. Think of the ice cream shop in Lowell, Heritage Farms on Pawtucket Boulevard, very close to our hotel. If you have a 14-year-old who is doing an internship at $15 an hour or a summer job at $15 an hour, it's going to mean fewer ice cream scoopers. It's just going to mean that. So living wage for me means take healthcare off the table. Healthcare is our big issue. Take it off the table. Let's go for universal coverage, and there are many ways to achieve that. That's what we need to do. If we don't do that, all these discussions about living wage become much more complicated than we can solve for.
Mr. Gifford, I'm sorry.
In order to get that reform of the healthcare system, we need to get money out of politics, and I mean now. It's just an unbelievable tangle of lobbyists in Washington now that really the pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare industry are among the worst, biggest funders of our government, our politicians' campaigns. So unless we do that, we're not going to get that healthcare reform. And I agree with you 100%. It's not just wages. You've got to take healthcare off the table, but you just don't get there without getting money out of politics.
Thanks. I do support $15 minimum wage. But I also think that our party very often doesn't look big picture enough, in essence, that they think about living wage and then that's when the conversation stops. We have got to figure out how to bring good paying jobs back to the United States and back to the 3rd District of Massachusetts. If you look at our website, don't have time to talk about this now, I have a plan to do this. And that is very much, I talked a lot about the fact that I lived and worked in Denmark for 4 years. Now, they look at renewable energy not just as a way to save the planet, but also as a job creator and a good middle class job creator. And that's what we've got to be focusing on in addition to boosting, to mandated boosting wages. By the way, Denmark, the most egalitarian country in the world, does not have a minimum wage.
So Rufus, when your former boss went to see Steve Jobs out in California and asked him to bring some really good jobs back to America, some of these assembly jobs, make some product in America, Steve Jobs said, those jobs are gone. They're just gone. Now, Barack Obama could have just walked away, which he did do, or he could have said, just the same, I'm going to send my Commerce Secretary out here next week, and he'll talk with you a little bit about it and see if we can get some ideas. He should have followed up. We have been rolling over for big business for too long in America. This is where it's got to stop. We've got to get these jobs back here in Foxconn Beach is going to make those phones in Wisconsin. You're going to have an American-made phone, but it took some doing.
Cole, you have a question or comment?
I do support the $15 minimum wage. I understand about small businesses, and there could be an exemption for businesses with fewer than 50 employees. So I understand that concern. But what gets me is when I hear McDonald's say, well, if we have to pay, hamburger flippers, more money, guess what you're going to have to pay for a Big Mac? Really? You're going to charge $15 for a Big Mac? I don't think so. I think we have to stop in this country getting browbeaten by big corporate America. This has been something that's happened traditionally. I think it's time it stopped. I think we also have to do more in terms of strengthening our labor unions. We need to overhaul that Janus decision with good legislation. So these are some things we have to do, but I do support a $15 minimum hour wage.
Mr. Belcher?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the argument that business makes that they'd have to raise the prices if they raise the wages. Well, we heard this from all the shoe companies that left our shores, and I was the one who followed this story the most carefully, and I was one who brought the Nike story to the United States. And you know what? New Balance is making shoes right here in the 3rd District. New Balance got the labor cost differential between China and Massachusetts down to $250 per pair. The labor cost differential down to $250 a pair. You can do this in America. And these people in Lawrence are happy to have those jobs at New Balance factory.
Thank you, Mr. Hand. Your question.
It's not just the minimum wage, although absolutely we need to get it to $15. I mean, we talk about the economy as though everyone's benefiting from it. We talk about, we don't talk about the cost of living that has basically made the income inequality gap in this country that it's the widest we've seen in decades. It's wage stagnation, it's the cost of health care, it's the cost of education, it's the fact that we've sold out to free trade agreements and we haven't negotiated, put incentives in place to grow wages here and to bolster our unions so that they've got the ability to collective bargain on your behalf. We've got so much work to do to right size who we're working for in this country. We have to stop giving our biggest breaks to corporations. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was over time. We're thoughtful than that. But we have to think more about our working class families and what they need to do to have economic opportunity.
Cheers. I've been saying at every opportunity that we need to have a corporate crime database at the Department of Justice. We need to, this is no laughing matter, I'm sorry. When you see workers that are afraid to form a union, because the boss has used the psychological pressures on them, this is awful to happen, and this is your work environment. And when a union comes to organize, and these thuggish union-busting consultants come in, this shouldn't be happening in America.
I do support an increase in the federal minimum wage. You have to recall that I believe in the late 60s, in current dollars, the minimum wage at the federal level is about $13. So if we do it gradually, this is reasonable with transitional grants to the Small Business Administration, because yes, there'd be an impact on small business, particularly in certain cost areas. There's also an opportunity for consumer-led growth, because unlike the old trickle-down tax myth, if you give money to working class families, they will spend it. And I will also say we will spend it because I have been in that category myself. So that is what we need to look at when we're looking at this policy. And I also agree with Lori, it's also the cost of living, it's also childcare, healthcare costs, but this is a key part of the equation. And it's not just at the bottom of the wage scale, it will exert upward pressure on wages for working class and middle class families. We gotta do it.
I really just get back to the question of union organizing, and we have to address this issue. We need to rebalance, and I'd like to get these wages through the power of workers getting together, because that's when you start to get better health insurance. That's when you start to get everything on the job fixed, is when you work with your fellow workers to improve conditions on everything, because collective bargaining means the boss sits down with you in dignity. And this is some respect that workers have lost in the United States.
Mr. Love, your question.
I strongly support the $15 minimum wage and to inflation. As someone who works at the bank, I do in helping small businesses and hand holding them and helping them throughout the years. I know that it will affect them. But just like Lenny, I think we need to come up with a system that will help them as well. But last week, I was with class organization workers while they were on strike. And these people were working for 20 plus years, getting less than $15. How do you get $11 working, helping people? And then the cost of living is, customers come up to me and letting me know, like, they don't have money to get into a home, to save and things like that, and that's just not fair for them. It's not fair that they are taking care of us and our community, and they can't even take care of themselves and their families. That's just wrong. And we're a nation of wealth that we can actually be able to help them.
Okay, back to the corporate crime database. You know the Toys R Us story. You know that Bain Capital borrowed $5 billion to do a leverage buyout of this company, and they crushed it with the debt. They dumped that $5 billion debt back on Toys R Us, and 33,000 workers lost their jobs just this summer. 33,000 jobs gone because Bain Capital made $50 million in fees, and that's how American economy works. This is what we survive. We tolerate this. We need to start calling out these corporations and bringing them to justice.
I just have to say, this is the perfect questions for Jeff. This is when he's been talking about everywhere, so he gets a real platform tonight, so good for him. Earlier, when I talked about, I guess I misspoke and said during the strike, I knew it was a lockout. I was doing all that work beforehand, during, and after. I think what was on my mind was, in fact, the class strike. The fact that a woman can work for 18 years and only be making $12 an hour, taking care of the most vulnerable among us, the most intellectually and developmentally disabled people in Lawrence, and barely be able to keep a roof over her head is wrong. Therefore, I am a strong supporter, have voted for, and we just passed the $15 an hour minimum wage here in Massachusetts. I believe it needs to happen at the federal government, and I do not believe in training wages. I think that many of the young people I see that are working are paying in to help their families keep their roof over their heads. It's got nothing to do with extra pocket money and everything to do with helping either save for school or help their families keep their budgets afloat.
Yeah, I just say I don't want to be misunderstood. $15 federal minimum wage is a good thing if it's gradual. You know, I wouldn't have a problem with it if it's gradual and if there are exemptions for smaller businesses, so I don't want to be misunderstood. It's still not livable wage. We have a situation in our country where, service members, even nearby here, because of the unaffordable housing problem, they're getting SNAP benefits. Those benefits, those food stamps may disappear. So we have full-time service members that are going to be crushed by this economy.
Mr. Fleisch, your question.
Look, I remember as a senior at Haverhill High School, on the weekends, going to work my first shift at Subway, and from Subway then going to a residential home where I worked as a waitress in the food section of the residential home, and I was making minimum wages. And I think back and I cannot imagine how a family of 3 or 4 can survive on that. We have an obligation to make sure people can have access to a meaningful wage. I support increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 and was really proud just 2 weeks ago in making sure I cast in my vote for that. We need to do better. Working class families across this country are being left behind, and we have an administration who just proposed a tax proposal that gave a tax break to the wealthiest Americans at the expense of working class people, who gave a tax break to the biggest corporations at the expense of small businesses. That's unacceptable. And until we elect working class people who know what it's like to struggle to make ends meet, who know what it's like to have $150,000 worth of debt, we are not going to have people at the table advocating on behalf of our needs. And for me, I will make sure that if given the opportunity to represent you, I never forget who I'm there to be a voice for.
Thank you. I have one big frustration over the last couple of years. As thrilled as I was by this uprising of fast food workers, I tried to get a message to them that they've got to narrow their focus. And what I did when I decided to take on Nike, I decided to focus on 8 shoe factories in one country. That is, narrow it down to one brand in operation in one country. And you know what? After about 2 years, I knew more about those factories than they did. So that was the key to winning that campaign. And I had Phil Knight, the founder and CEO, go to the National Press Club and say his brand had become synonymous with slave wages and exploitation. That was 5 years after I started my campaign.
First of all, I apologize for being late. I had an amazing supporter who 2 months ago had asked for the state to bring together some friends, so I apologize. When it comes to $15 minimum wage, I think the fundamental problem here is that we're giving ourselves too much credit for passing $15 minimum wage. The reality is people can't provide for their families on a $15 minimum wage. So we need to figure out, how do we make sure that we're on the side of people and not businesses? The vast majority of these businesses we are talking about can't afford a $15 minimum wage and pay people. And so we need to make sure that, sure, I completely agree with Alexandra that when it comes to transitional grants for the ones that need it, that we need it, but we need to be on the side of people and not businesses. Also, the reality is, the studies show that $15 minimum wage actually helps retain workers and saves costs in the long term. So let's focus on that, and let's not focus on giving businesses more breaks.
Last one. You know why we're not going to get there on the $15 minimum wage or labor law reform or anything else we want? It's because of all the money in politics. The number of $100,000 plus contributors between 2006 and 2008 and 2016 increased 12-fold. I'm going to say that again. The number of $100,000 plus contributors between 2008 and 2016 went up 12 times. There's too much money in politics. We're never going to get the things we need to feed our families and give a decent living to people if this continues.
Mr. Golder, you drew question number 5. I presume you're aware of the nomination recently of Brett Kavanaugh to be the next Associate Justice on the Supreme Court. Though you cannot vote on this confirmation itself, what, if anything, can you do or would you do to prevent such a man from becoming an Associate Justice? And as nowhere in Article 3 of the Constitution does it specify the number of justices to sit on the Supreme Court, and over time the number has greatly fluctuated, would you support reducing the number of justices from 9 to 8 or making some other adjustment?
I think what you're suggesting or asking is that we manipulate the numbers of the Supreme Court. Well, there's a past precedent for doing that. President Roosevelt in the 30s, when he was having trouble getting his New Deal legislation passed, came up with the ingenious idea he would just add new justices onto the court, and the Congress had something to say about that. They did not let him do that. You know, we have to play by the rules, even when we don't like the way the game is being played. The beauty of our system of government is we can succeed playing by the rules if we play it smart. And as a member of Congress, the way I would deal with a situation like that, and I think we are going to get this. I mean, whether he gets nominated or some other Trumper gets nominated, you know, the court is going to be moving to the right, maybe even for the next 20 years. What Congress can do is pass legislation that mitigates and ameliorates bad decisions. I'll give you one example, that Janus decision I referred to earlier that says that members of public employee unions don't have to pay agency dues, you know, to be in a union. We can pass legislation. This is one of the first things I'll do if I get elected. This is personal to me because I was a member of AFSCME, which was a party to that suit. And it'll say simply, if you belong to a union, if you are not paying agency dues to a union, you don't get the benefit of a union contract. You don't get the benefit of steward protection. Go and That's how you deal with bad justices and bad decisions.
Thank you. Mr. Dosh, you get the first question or comment.
I was a law clerk for the Chief Judge of the District of Maryland. He was appointed by President George Bush Sr. And he decided that he wanted smart law clerks who were liberal. And so he chose me and another liberal. I miss those days. I fear that we're going to have a Supreme Court that is going to be packed now in the next 20, 25 years. It's going to be textualist. And unfortunately, that's going to wipe out a lot of the progress that we've seen. Roe v. Wade is now in danger. Democrats have got to stop losing these elections. That's all I would say. Thank you.
I agree. We need a strong Congress that can be a counterbalance to the court. You mentioned Roe v. Wade. There are things that can be done to mitigate bad decisions for Roe v. Wade. One of the things that that's been done is there's been this chipping away of the decision. The decision has not been eliminated, but there's been decisions to chip away at what kind of hospital care be provided and what kind of facilities need to be provided. And Congress, a strong Congress, can intervene and say, look, this is the way it has to be in terms of providing facilities in a given state. If you don't do that, no federal aid to those medical facilities.
Mr. Gifford, you get the next comment or question.
I'm a married gay man. My husband's sitting right over there. I remember tears streaming down my face when I saw the Obama White House lit up in rainbow colors in June of 2015. And Stephen and I were married 4 months later. You sure as hell better bet that I'm going to fight this with every single breath in my body. I don't care, Kirk, if I get to vote on it or not. This is actually part of the role of a congressperson as far as I'm concerned. It's not all about sponsoring and passing bills. It's about advocacy. It's about raising issues up. And I guarantee you that rights that have been given, Americans do not take rights away. And if they talk about taking our rights away, rights that we have been given already, you sure as hell better bet that we're going to rise up and fight against it.
Amen. I don't think.
Have an amen from the congregation.
I don't think even the Supreme Court would be that dastardly stupid. But if it were, again, I go back to my original point, which is a strong Congress that renews every right that was given, hard fought and hard won through that Supreme Court decision.
Yeah, I would just say that we've got to have term limits, not only for the office that we're running for, and I'm a term limit proponent, but these justices can't stay there 40 years. And I don't know how you do that, whether you can do it legislatively, or whether it takes a constitutional amendment or what. But I really, in lieu of that, would be for expanding the court. And I just don't see a path to getting the kind of majorities we need in Congress to do that, because raising money, the Democrats are raising money from the same banks and insurance companies and Wall Street firms. How do we differentiate ourselves on policy? I mean, we haven't over the last 15, 20 years. So I don't think it's coming anytime soon, unfortunately.
Mr. Han, your question, comment? I did it again, I apologize. I'm getting tired of this.
I think we all are. I agree with you about the term limits for Supreme Court justices, not increasing or decreasing, because that becomes politically manipulative. But certainly just the whole concept of having justices serve for life, I think is a very poor way of governing, and we do need to change that. It would be perfectly reasonable to have a term of, say, maybe a 10-year term, and that way I think we wouldn't be locked into decisions that could last, into a century. So I do agree with that part.
Mr. Han, sorry.
I'll echo what Rufus said. I think we're all, we're all fearful of what this court is going to roll back in terms of women's rights, equality, environment, union rights, etc. But there is something we can do. We can do it as citizens. We can do it as members of Congress. We can make Senator McConnell expose the entire record of Brett Kavanaugh, so that same way he did with Justice Kagan. Because this is someone who was involved with Ken Starr's very partisan independent counsel on Bill Clinton. This is someone who was involved in the George W. Bush White House, and all of that needs to be unfolded during these confirmation hearings, so that we get to see, the full extent of what he'll be about on the Supreme Court bench.
One of the things when Judge Kavanaugh was getting heard before his appointment to the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, he was asked, I think it was by Senator Chuck Schumer, would he support Roe v. Wade? He said he would. Well, a decision came out involving somebody that was not a citizen, and his decision was no Roe v. Wade protection, for this person who was not a citizen. So I have strong negative feelings about this particular justice. Hopefully, we can get him defeated. But again, that doesn't mean that the next appointee is going to be so much better. Again, we need a strong Congress to be able to go in and basically clean the floor, sweep everything up, and sweep up the damage that's going to be done by any decisions.
Ms. Chandler, your question or comment?
I went to law school, but this isn't a legal question for me. It's very directly impacts me. I'm someone who's been without health insurance. I'm someone who's been discriminated against when I had health insurance because I'm a transgender woman. Then when my wife and I wanted to marry, we had to shop for a county or state where we could actually get married. And there are plenty of laws out there that would say that a doctor should have a right when I walk into a hospital to simply let me bleed out because I am who I am. That said, when I approach this, the way I look at it is the Senate, I think, should not consider Kavanaugh until we have the Mueller report, because the president is under investigation and of Kavanaugh's comments in the matter, but there's no substitute for victory. We need to start winning in state legislatures to push back against these laws at the state level and at the federal level, and Congress needs to stand up and resume its constitutional role.
Yes, I agree. Congress needs to step up. We need to resume our constitutional role stronger than ever because of these decisions that are going to be come down.
Ms. Malone, your question or comment?
Well, I think anything for life is dangerous, so I'm not for, I would change that. But also, I think in terms of talking about Congress and its roles and things like that, that's where I think money come into play, and we don't have a backbone because of the fact that, I'm all for playing by the rules and everything, but the thing is that we're so democratic, we have this values of being so nice, but then the Republicans are not being nice, and none of us have a backbone. You know why? Because all of them are taking money from the same place. So basically, we need to have new people that have no connection to money, to power, to make sure that we're making decisions based on people and what is right for people.
We certainly need to take money out of politics. As you can see, even in this campaign, it's easier said than done. I think maybe one thing we could do as a first step, even with Citizens United, is if we could get the public broadcasting media that does public service announcements to forego those public service announcements for various charitable causes and to focus on giving free time to candidates running for federal office. That would at least help, reduce some of the problem in terms of raising money in campaigns.
Ms. O'Donnell, your question or comment?
I absolutely agree with Alexandra that there should be no new Supreme Court justice named until we see the Mueller investigation. The stakes are just too high for us to allow someone to be put on that court to change the balance for many years to come and to erode many of the protections that we have known over the last few years. In terms of what Rufus said with the rainbow lights shining when gay marriage became national, I played a part in that. I played a part in that here in Massachusetts when we were the first state in the nation to consider that with the Goodrich decision. What we need in our leaders and in our new members of Congress and throughout the state legislatures are people that show their values, right? Of being unafraid, of being leaders, of being compassionate, and of being persistent. And I persisted for a couple of minutes yesterday morning on Fox News, and I think we need to do more of that. We need to speak up on behalf of people and say that where we're going is wrong. But I absolutely agree there shouldn't even be a placement of a Supreme Court justice at this point. There should have been one during the Obama administration.
I agree, but you also have to be realistic here as well, because even if there isn't a President Trump, there'll be a President Pence, there'll be a nominee that may not be Kavanaugh, but it may be somebody worse. So ultimately, we still have to look at the final end game here, and when one branch of government is not functioning the way we'd like, it's up to the other branch or branches to take up that slack, and that's where the Congress comes in, and that's where we need to have it. First of all, we need to elect more Democrats to Congress, have a stronger congressional influence, and do something to mitigate and ameliorate any bad decisions that come down from the Supreme Court.
Ms. Matias, your question about it.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be brief. I think that we need to think about this in the short term and long term. We need to fill up seats for 2018. We need to make sure that in 2020 we don't have this president at the helm of our country. And women have worked too hard. They've created a pathway for me to be able to stand on the stage today and say I have access to my reproductive rights, and we should do everything we can in our power to ensure that Kavanaugh is not appointed, because he is a threat to our fundamental rights, marriage equality, women's reproductive rights. We had this court just weeks ago uphold the Muslim ban. This is not the direction our country needs to be heading in, and we need to stay engaged and continue to fight against an administration that does not represent us. Thank you.
Again, we may very well need to fight this particular nomination, Kavanaugh, but again, we're going to come up with somebody else who's going to be just as bad, maybe worse. So again, it goes back to the whole process here of Congress having to step up, take an active role in making sure that any decisions come down that are harmful, whether it's through Roe v. Wade or labor relations, that those are changed through congressional legislation. And the other thing I'd also mention is Congress also has a role to play, not just with the Supreme Court, but with many of the federal judgeships in the district and circuit courts as well. And we have to take a very proactive role in how we deal with those appointees as well.
Mr. Coe, your question.
Thank you. I completely agree with what Bopa said, and I think we can't take this lightly. The bottom line is that Democrats have allowed themselves to be steamrolled by Republicans for way too long. We saw it with Merrick Garland. We see it with the terminology that Republicans use on many Supreme Court issues: pro-life, right to work, death panels. And we use this terminology. So I think Democrats need to use every single power at their disposal to hold up this nomination and to fight what we believe in. If you saw the graphs, Kavanaugh is about where Clarence Thomas is in terms of his politics. There is too much at stake not to fight back with every weapon in our arsenal to make sure that we are fighting for the values we believe in.
Do you have any suggestion with some of the weapons in that arsenal maybe?
You highlighted it. You look at the number of Supreme Court justices. Quite frankly, we have a model of how we push back with regard to saving the Affordable Care Act. We made those swing voters famous. We stood outside their offices. We rose up as a country and said that every single person in this country deserves access to good quality, affordable health care. And you know what? 23 million people today still have that health care because of that action. It's up to all of us to step up, to apply the pressure to make sure that this goes the right way.
Mr. Goldberg, your final rejoinder.
Again, there's no disagreement here. It's just that we have to be politically realistic. That even if we can defeat Kavanaugh, there's going to be another appointee, not to our liking. So again, we have to utilize the system that we have, the checks and balances that we have, and our best checks and balance right now is Congress, and Congress taking a proactive role where court decisions are made and they're changed with legislation. And I really think, until we can get a different president and a different vacancy on the court, that's really going to be our best strategy.
Thank you very much. Before we go to the last question of this half, is the air conditioning working? You're freezing. It's me then. No. All right. Ms. Trahan, you're the next one up. You said question 10. If I may have it just momentarily while I read the question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you think that Massachusetts, as well as the U.S., should be less reliant on fossil fuels? If so, how would you plan to help Massachusetts and the nation become less reliant on fossil fuels, which is all imported into our Commonwealth, and help develop locally sourced renewable energy?
Thank you. Yes, I think we're moving in the wrong direction in the environment. Massachusetts has 100,000 clean jobs, and I think we can do a heck of a lot more to incent small businesses and large corporations to make more an investment in renewable energy. And frankly, the federal government, this is the reason why we need to win in 2018. We need to take back the House. We need to hold this administration accountable. We need to roll back all the gutting that's happened to the EPA. I'm going to get a lot of time to talk about what I think those things are, but for starters, we need to get back to Obama's Clean Power Plan by reducing pollutants by 25% by 2030. We need to do more to you forget all the things that he's just taken away from us. The first thing he did when he got into office was we walked away from our position of power on climate change, and we left the Paris Climate Accord. I think there's so much for us to do when we go back to Congress in terms of the environment, but absolutely we need to get on a path of reducing our dependency on fossil fuels. I can't understand for the life of me why this administration does not look at this as an economic opportunity. I've never seen so many capitalists in the cabinet, and yet nobody is using this environment as a way to grow our jobs, not just in the Commonwealth, but nationally.
Mr. Goss, your question or comment?
I think Lori's right. My company, when we bought Stonehenge, we reduced our dependence on fossil fuels by 30%. We are installing another $600,000 of equipment that will include solar and cogeneration facilities, so we'll cut our carbon footprint another 42%. So by the time we're done with it, we will have not only a lower dependence on fossil fuels, but also the ability to generate power where we didn't before. This has all happened without any assistance from the federal government, and that's where we need legislation. We need to work so that we can support small businesses that make these decisions. we are the consumers, right, fundamentally, and we need to have more support, and that's what I would do to do that.
Mr. Hand, your reminder.
I'm going to give us a gift. I'm going to just comment after something I want to add to or disagree with. Is that good? I mean, I think what Das did for small business is terrific.
Thanks, guys. This is an obsession of mine. I talked a little bit about my green jobs plan early on, so I won't dwell on that, but I want to tell you why this is so important to me. I've always been a climate activist in my life personally, but then I went to Denmark, and for 4 years, as I said, I stood and stared at offshore wind turbines from my window in Copenhagen. And I realized that as they're 40% renewable, that we had the ability to actually generate renewable energy in the United States. Novel idea, right? So we hosted 2 delegations from the state of Massachusetts at my residence in Copenhagen, and then actually brought a delegation of Danish business to Boston in the fall of 2016 to talk about the value of offshore wind in particular. Well, guess what? Massachusetts just greenlit the first commercial scale offshore wind farm in the country, south of Martha's Vineyard. And guess who's building it? It's a Danish company. And that's very, very good. And we can continue to do more. This is about saving the planet. But as I said before, it's connected to minimum wage. It's connected to job creation. That's something to be celebrated.
It's stuck in there. Go ahead.
There was a theft of intellectual property just down the road in Ayer. A company named AMSC lost 700 jobs because their biggest customer, a Chinese company, stole their intellectual property. That was 2011. Earlier this year, in January, first ever criminal conviction of a Chinese company for intellectual property theft. And it was like nothing happened. Nothing in the Globe, nothing in the Sun. I read it in the Wall Street Journal. Where were the members of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the U.S. Congress, the Democrats? Why weren't they out having a celebration about a law that was implemented and worked? Because the Republicans have demonized government for 40 years, government and regulation. We've got to be vocal. When something like this happens, I want to fight for those 700 jobs that were lost and fight for restitution for those workers, and I think they deserve it. And this company settled for $57 million. It was $800 million loss, the court said, and they settled 2 weeks ago for $57 million. It's a travesty.
I remind folks that the topic on this question was renewable energy and resources, just as a general. So thank you, but go ahead with, who's next? Mr. Goldberg.
Well, first of all, what we should not be doing is what President Trump would like us to do, which is renew and revive coal. I mean, here we've gone all this length to finally get coal out of the picture, and he wants to try and bring it back. And it's supposedly a jobs issue, but there are very few jobs left in the coal industry. And the second thing we should not be doing is going into nuclear power. Now, I have heard some people who are concerned about climate change say, well, it's green because it won't cause any carbon emissions. Well, it creates the most horrible hazardous waste which we have no way of disposing of. We should be thankful we've gotten rid of those 2 forms of fossil energy that we no longer need. I have a proposal that says that we should increase the gas tax, the federal gas tax, as a way of reducing per capita consumption of gasoline. I feel that that has a 2-for solution here. It'll reduce carbon emissions per capita. It'll also give us some money to provide for our infrastructure, and we won't have to raise $1.5 trillion from Trump's proposal to rebuild infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to respond to that. I can't get behind your gas tax because right now working class families are just feeling it too much in their pocket. I could get behind a carbon tax as a way to pay for what you'd like to do.
Oh, yes. Yeah, please.
I'm fine with the carbon tax. The reason I propose the gasoline tax is because what happens with the free market pricing is prices are going up all the time, people start using less gasoline and the prices go down. So basically, it's the oil companies getting the benefit of these price fluctuations. So what I want to see is a stable price with a guaranteed amount of money that can be used for public transportation and infrastructure and not have to spend it out of general tax revenue.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
I support the 100 by 50 Act in Congress, which would get us to 100% renewables by 2050. I would hope to accelerate it and to get it to 2035 if possible. We in Massachusetts, are blessed. I mean, between solar, wind, geothermal, water, untapped things, industrial hemp, other biofuels, we have a lot of potential here. And I view this both from the lens of my kids who will see the year 2100, God willing, and national security, because if you want to really forge a strong America in the world, instead of all caps tweeting at Iran, get us energy independent. The Middle East will be much easier to manage after that, I promise you. So I will use both of those lenses to advocate for this.
I have to agree with Alexandra on this, and so one of the things that's frustrating is that we are actually stuck, right? We are stuck between having this president believe that clean coal is an actual thing and that we should go back to it, or whether we're going to make the transition faster to clean energy. And I think we probably all up here on stage are in agreement of putting more incentives in place so that we can get, into we're incenting more clean energy investments, because look, we all went through last winter together, and that is hitting us right in our pocketbooks right now. When we are stuck in the middle, we get hurt. Working families, middle class families get hurt.
Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna say the same thing, but I truly, I know in traveling around the district, I know we all have different issues, and one can ask if what's your number one, number two, whatever. But I think, climate change should be our number one issue. In the long run, if we don't have clean air and clean water, it doesn't matter. It's gonna affect our health. We can't get good. You can't achieve your American dream if your health is bad and you can't go to work and you can't be educated. So, I truly believe that it's important, and we need to impose taxes on fossil fuels and incentivize so one of the things what I would do is we do this where we give out loans to businesses and homes where it's 0% to you, and some way we help to make sure that people businesses and homes get are more clean and more sorry. But yes, I do believe that it's important, and we really need to focus on it, and we really need to. Yeah, thank you.
You're waiting?
Yes, I am. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
no problem. Ms. McCown.
Thank you. I was happy to vote for the Global Warming Solutions Act in 2008 in Massachusetts to boost renewables, and in fact, we became with solar the second largest state in the nation in terms of what we were producing in terms of solar. We need to do more of that. A couple of weeks ago, I voted in the state Senate on a very ambitious package to pave the way for the use of hydro, the use of wind, additional solar, ideas like allowing folks who live in apartments to be able to have community solar, allowing cities to engage in community solar, not just having it be about it being on people's homes. I'd love to see a renewable energy infrastructure program here in the United States to help people be able to gain solar, to bring jobs, to bring forth the infrastructure necessary to be able to do wind and hydro, etc. I'd just lastly like to say, when the Kinder Morgan gas pipeline tried to roll through my community in my state Senate district, I fought tooth and nail with my constituents, because continuing to build infrastructure on behalf of the fossil fuel industry is dollars outside of renewable energy. We can do better.
Comment, excuse me. Did you wait?
I'm sorry, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Look, climate change is the biggest issue we face as a country, and what we have is a president who does not believe that climate change is real, and we've seen this administration in the past year and a half roll back many Obama critical environmental protections. What we need to do is actually fund the EPA adequately, invest in renewable energy resources like many of my colleagues on stage have mentioned. Solar, wind, electric cars, our public transit system. Here in Massachusetts, one of the biggest producers of carbon emissions are cars. If we invest in our public transit system, we make it more accessible for people, we're gonna be able to lower that. And ultimately, we need to impose carbon fees. This is gonna help lower carbon emissions. All of this, as Rufus had mentioned, is gonna help drive economic growth and green jobs, and it's simple. We have a moral obligation to leave our children a planet they can live in. Thank you.
I get time at the end. Do I get time at the end?
You can answer it. You'll get the final result.
Okay.
There you go. Thank you. I completely and utterly agree with what Rep. Matias just said. I mean, we have a fundamental problem in this country, which is we have a president, and quite frankly, tens of millions of people in this country who don't even believe that climate change is real. It's a fundamental issue. So we have a green plan on our website that I won't get too much into, but absolutely, Rep. Matias is absolutely right. We need to invest in our infrastructure to make sure that people are able to have options to take public transportation so that we're taking fossil fuel emitting cars off the road. We need to also make sure we're fighting for the things that cities and towns benefit from greatly locally, like they did in Boston when I was chief of staff, like brownfields grants that allow us to clean up contaminated waste sites, like making sure that businesses are reporting their energy output, like having a carbon tax. These are things that we can and should do as government, and we need to hold businesses accountable to advance to get to 100% renewable energy.
Sure, thank you. As a congressperson, I think you've got a couple levers here. One, you've got the ability to work, understand your district really well, and use the power of your office to attract jobs to your district. You know, I saw that up close when I was a congressional chief of staff, you know, using your ability to attract employers that Massachusetts is very good to. So I would love to attract you know, clean energy jobs to this part of the state so that they can take advantage of our highly skilled workforce. This issue goes deeper. Big oil is as much of a lobby down in Washington as the NRA, as tobacco used to be, and we need to fight that lobby every single day. We need to take the money out of politics. We need to end Citizens United. We need to cap the amount of money that big oil can give to the committees that oversee them. That is what we need to do. That is how we get real reform on the environment.
Halfway. We will now take a 15-minute break, and we will resume the second half as soon as that time is up. Thank you.
There's serious talk about that. But there's going to be a solar farm off of Poverty Road, right? One on Poverty Road. Yeah, they're doing something special to put solar farm on Poverty Road, running down through Pine Hill. That'll be okay. I gotta plug this in. We can talk about Jesus. What's okay?
Well, I didn't know if you were recording.
Oh, let me shut it off then.
Okay. Except, how can I access the live stream now? Like for the second half of the what's Do you know?
Over there, I can bring you to the individual who knows more.
Oh, all right. Thanks.
Oh, no problem. I just have to shut this off. Or it didn't wait till the second half. That's what I was.
Oh, how do we pause it? Yeah, good question. Hey, how you doing?
Oh, she wanted to.
How can we access the live stream from home now? Because I've got a couple of them.
So let's see. The live stream is this page here.
Okay, thank you so much.
Have a great night.
Thank you, too.
Hey, thanks so much for what you do. I don't know how you're hanging in there with. Like,
Oh, I do filmmaking, so this is generally what I do. Is I'm generally behind a camera or generally dealing with at least this. I have a film shoot this weekend too, so I'm like, Kirk had asked, the moderator had asked me.
I just can't imagine like.
Oh, I usually sometimes shoot films on iPhone, so this is.
Hi, how are you?
So, okay, yeah, I mean, if you have to let it, if it's easier just to let it run, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. They're probably listening to us now, which is all good.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. So thanks everybody for hanging out with us and watching the debate.
Oh, no problem.
So I'm Nathan, by the way.
I'm Jonathan. Most people call me John, though, so.
Great to meet you, Jonathan.
These are volunteers. We don't have software. These are things that are, she's asking how much money we're making off of this.
I'm thinking about, so far I'm about 2,000 in a row. You guys about, I don't know, 2,000 Well, what we're selling is to voters in Massachusetts. We want to give voters USA. All right.
No worries. Someone could win with 11% or 20%, and we'd have to ask ourselves, what about the other 80 or 90%? What do those voters think? With ranked choice voting as a voter, when you go into the voting booth, instead of picking just one of those candidates, you get to give us your opinion about the whole slate. This is my first choice, this is my second choice, this is my third choice. So that way you don't have to think about strategy when you're voting. You just go for the way ranked choice votes for candidates, your vote will then be counted towards your next choice. And this allows us to get the same quality results with 10 candidates that we get when we have 2 run, and know which one do you remember, I don't know, you Democrat?
Sure. Yeah.
Do you remember when Gore was running against Bush in 2000? Do you remember in Florida when Ralph Nader was in the race and there was like, oh no, Ralph is going to spoil the race. So ranked choice voting, Nader voted with his first choice voting, Gore was so that there's a spoiler problem where the candidate who had the second candidate, the third candidate in the race
Some guy ended up winning after the different choice. So to me, I think but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, democracy though is about the one preferred by the people. I mean, I think he's filming the event.
I don't want to be in your film.
Oh, I'm not thing. Don't worry about it.
I'm signing on every
I'm Nathan, by the way. Where are you from around here?
Yeah,
Planchonia? Nice.
Well, nice talking to you anyway.
Europe uses the proportional, so the two countries that use this are Australia and America. Proportional representation solves the same problem in a different way. I don't know in Australia it's been for about 100 years now. So we know it works. You know, the other nice benefit we're seeing is that about 10 or so U.S. cities have used it for about 10 years, and whenever it's used, it increases negative campaigning, it increases constructiveness and stability of campaigns. And the reason is, by doing this plan, more candidates in the race, represent different perspectives, and those candidates will want to earn the second or third choice votes of their opponents. So in that situation, if they have to do that to win, in that situation, if we're going against each other, but I don't want your supporters to come in second, I'm going to be more, I'm going to focus on what matters, and I'm not going to be doing a personal attack, unnecessary personal attack, to offend your base. Exactly. You're absolutely right. You attract more flies with
Tell my dad. I think I'm doing everybody a favor by saying, excuse me for 1 second.
So, John, where do you live?
Oh, I come back and forth here, but I'm on the Cape. I live I live in New Bedford, Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
So
And you came all the way up here for this? Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Are you going home today?
No, I'm not going home today. Probably. I'm gonna ask one of my friends if I could crash, and then because I have an appointment early tomorrow morning anyway, so I have to just talk to a couple of people for just the shoot that I'm doing this weekend, just to finalize some little things. Because I'm coming back here. I'm coming back up here on the weekend. So,
oh wow!
Yeah.
Neat. You said New Bedford. Who are you from? Do you know Josh Callahan?
No, sounds familiar. The name. I tend to see a lot of people. I know a lot of people.
Yeah, I know. He might be from somewhere else too. I forget. I get confused.
But yeah.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, how's it going?
Good. Have you heard about ranked choice voting?
Oh, yes, I have.
Awesome. Are you on our supporter list?
I already scanned them, waiting for your
Are you on our supporter list though?
Yes, I believe I am.
Okay, good. We need you there. We need to. That helps us bring it to Massachusetts. Thank you, sir. We're on my phone for 2 seconds. I think I might see if I can vote. That's going to
You know what? Jim
No worries.
is much better at it. I haven't actually done it. She'd like to set it up on her phone. Keep checking, and to be honest, anything on this phone is because I've allowed myself to I've allowed myself to be stupid because I Are you looking for choice voting? Thank you.
What?
Are you with choice voting?
I'm helping them out, but yeah, you can.
No, yeah. All for it. You guys are doing a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a longer film shoot this weekend. I have 3 days worth of filming.
Oh my gosh.
I'm trying to finish a movie that I wrote. I'm trying to finish a movie that I wrote.
Oh my gosh.
So.
Movie, nice.
Yeah, I've done. I've written 3 now.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one's more like it's kind of set. It's kind of a trilogy set in the '80s, so it's very retro and.
Oh god.
Yeah, we like shot in a diner in New Jersey.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Jim? Alright.
I'll give it right. I'm just charging up, then I'll give it right back to you.
Oh, no worries.
Are the numbers coming in?
Yeah, she does.
Is that the ding I keep hearing?
It's probably someone's.
Oh, the loud ping? That's from the, I forget what iPad it is, but it's kind of like a countdown, so every 30 seconds.
Oh, is that why?
Oh, you need a hand or you got, you want me?
We have 4, so.
It's fine, we're getting votes in.
It's runoff voting used to be the way, and now it's got worked into ranked choice voting. So what's the difference? Ranked choice voting and instant runoff. Oh, I thought you were, I overheard you wrong.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah. I know, but for a person like me, you would say it's runoff voting. I'd be saying, okay, that's like having an election and nobody gets 40%. And so you're going to have another one. That's another $50,000. Save yourself $50,000 and not even voting. You know, and some people would say, oh, that's what it is. So I don't run things around here, but listen to
Okay.
My seat. Yes,
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Those watching. I sincerely apologize.
baristas. You know, there was a tip jar, and the shift supervisors were participating in taking the tips from the tip jar. And there's a smart lawyer there in Boston that said, hey, they're managing, they shouldn't be sharing. She won $57 million for these baristas. You know, they went out in California, they won, but it was overturned on appeal, over $200 million. I'll get a card for you.
Great shoes.
Oh, thank you.
Fantastic.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to resume. If you will please take your seats. Please take your seats.
Das is going in the right direction.
Please take your seats. I would like to ask the candidates to please be a bit more mindful of the timer. I'm about to sick a former school teacher on you if you're not. So, other than that, you've done pretty good overall. We're almost there. Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm not going to ask Barbara or Barbara how many speed laws they broke getting here from Boston. And I do that very much. Question 6. The Ninth Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, Judge I'm going to screw this one up to say O'Scanlan, wrote a decision just today that the Second Amendment guarantees Americans' right to carry a gun for self-defense in public. This ruling overturns a Hawaii licensing rule limiting possession to the home. And only a week before, they overruled the California ban on high-capacity magazines for guns as being unconstitutional. Do you agree or disagree with this general idea? Why or why not? If not, what if any?
I disagree with the decision, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I have so much to say. I'm going to probably use all my time on this one. And to say that lightly, I'll now proceed seriously. My own son, my 6-year-old now, when we lived in DC, he was in a neighborhood public school in DC. And I believe I've mentioned I've lived through the 9/11 attacks in New York City. But the scariest moment of my life was when I got a call working in the Pentagon that his school was on lockdown for a school shooting incident. Happened across the street from his school. The school went on lockdown. Thank God, no students, no staff were hurt. But my heart skipped beats, and that's something that you never forget. So I will bring the passion that animates to Congress, and the fact that, frankly, I tracked the flow of weapons from country to country abroad for 12 of my 13 years in government. So I will bring a lot of lessons learned and tools. Now back to this decision. This is selective rejection of textualism. There are certain conservatives that love to read the exact text of the Constitution and say that that's what it says, until there's something like this where they're fine with inventing new meanings. The Second Amendment guarantees the right to bear arms in support of a well-regulated militia. This decision's wrong, and I look forward to talking about my solutions as we go through the back and forth.
Alexandra and I are both constitutional lawyers, or I practiced in the federal court system. This is obvious. She's right. The Second Amendment did not say this. This happened in 2008. We used to say in the courthouse, bad facts create bad law, and the facts here were bad. This was a DC police officer that had a gun that was not disassembled in his home. The prosecutor decided to prosecute the case, and it worked out. We need to overturn that decision. The Second Amendment does not guarantee a right in every instance to a personal weapon of choice. It is just not the case.
So to go through some of the policies that I'd bring to bear on this subject, it's first and foremost, I would restore the federal assault weapons ban. It's common sense to me. Weapons of war, and I followed weapons of war for years, have no place in our communities, none whatsoever. And really, so much of what I'm going to say, because I'm about to run out of time again, is bringing federal law in line with our good Massachusetts gun laws. It's making sure that we in Massachusetts don't suffer from the lax laws in other states. And again, I will get to more in just a moment.
We're all going to agree on this. I'm pretty sure. Look, to me, the NRA holds Congress hostage, and this is one of the reasons why people just fundamentally don't believe in their elected leaders, because we have 90% of Americans that are in favor of things like universal background checks, ban on bump stocks. 60% of Americans favor an assault weapons ban. And guess what? Congress does nothing every single day. They even talk about it sometimes. Paul Ryan's talked about it. Donald Trump has talked about it. But guess what? There's never been a vote in recent years. Democrats hostage. And we just got to get rid of this kind of special interest money and money out of politics and money out of if we are going to get this kind of stuff done.
I couldn't agree more when it comes to the money in politics aspect, and that's where it's not just the NRA, it's all of these special interest groups, and frankly, just all the ultra-wealthy donors that, apart from those groups, also dominate Congress, because what that means is we elect people that reflect those networks where you have that kind of donor base. But back to the issue of guns. We also need to ban large capacity magazines. Again, nothing in the Constitution says that we can't do that. That has nothing to do with the militia. I'd also like to bring some of the tools that we had to bear in the intelligence community when working on this issue from abroad, and I'll talk about that after I yield to the next person.
Yeah, it's got to be the NRA versus the people, and I know who I'm betting on. If you're trying to get Congress to do something, good luck with that. I think we've got to take the NRA on frontally. I think we've got to separate them from their sources of support in the corporate community. And if I'm elected, I will go in front of the nearest FedEx or whatever the corporate sponsor of the NRA is, nearest the Capitol building, for one day for every death in a school shooting or a church shooting. It's got to happen that way. And I hope other members would join me, because unless you separate them from their corporate sponsors, you're not going to get anywhere with the NRA. Their headquarters is out in 40 miles into Virginia. They're afraid to have a headquarters in Washington.
I'm going to proceed. So when we're following weapons transfers abroad, we have these things, end user certificates, that guarantee that they who say are going to buy a weapon of war are actually the ones using it, not diverting it to terrorists. We don't have that kind of tracking within the United States. Because of the NRA, the records of gun purchases that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives collects are in a big warehouse in West Virginia. Paper in the 21st century. So I can bring the perspective and
I feel it's important to have a dialogue with people who are on the other side of the issue. So in the campaign, whenever I hear somebody ask me, where do you stand on the Second Amendment? I start off by saying, I'm for it. I'm for you going to an armory, getting out your musket, and fighting in the right. I'll join you. But then I ask, what is behind this nation with assault weapons? And of course I get there's no such thing as an assault weapon, it's a verb. I say, okay, what is it that you need to assault weapon somebody for? And what I find, going into this dark side, that the real issue here is a fear that if there's a takeover of the government, that they'll have their weapon to defend themselves. And I just say to them, just picture this. You know, tanks are coming down the street, it's like Prague, 1968. You're going to be up on a roof with an assault weapon, good luck.
I agree with having to have dialogue with the other side. And again, this is where I think I'm uniquely positioned for success on this issue, because much as my job was tracking these weapons flowing across the world, I worked for the United States Navy, and I had officers and enlisted work for me, all of whom were qualified in firearms. And I can speak the language, shorthand here, assault weapons ban. I know to talk about muzzle velocity and barrel length when I'm talking to certain people. So I will bring that perspective, and I also support the Second Amendment. I just support the text of the Constitution when we're talking about the Second Amendment.
I know Alexander's gonna get to all of it, but how background checks at every single point of sale. I mean, you can't no fly, no buy. If you've got a restraining order and you're harm to yourself or to someone else, you can't buy a gun in this country. How about basic research? How about we commission the Centers for Disease Control to commission research on the impact of guns to our public health and public safety? I know you're getting all that, but I had to say something in 30 seconds.
The challenge is 30 seconds at a time. It's like a Twitter thread. So, getting it. So yes, background checks. And again, look at Massachusetts, our extreme risk protection orders. Why isn't that law throughout the country? I mean, these are the things that we can do. And then furthermore, what I would say is the federal government is uniquely positioned a buyback program. You have communities in this district that could really benefit from offering a buyback where weapons are turned in, no questions asked. There's no room in municipal budgets or in the state budget for that. The federal government can do that, and that's how governments like Australia, similar gun culture, made a lot of progress in this issue. So that's something else I'll do.
I'm all for the Second Amendment, but I don't think that it should be easier to get a gun than registering your car. There's a process in getting your car registered, and I think that it's way too easy to get guns, and you know, as a mother, I shouldn't be afraid to be sending my kids to school and worrying that they're not going to come back to me. And you know, until we get money out of politics, this is not going to happen. We need to vote these people that are taking money from the NRA out.
We do need to vote them out. And I think one of the reasons why people can be pessimistic about this issue, I am optimistic about this, is so many. Because with Parkland and other things, tragedies that we've witnessed, there is a voice of the young voters in this country, or the about to be voters. They are coming. And they're going to demand change on this, absolutely. And frankly, having mentioned Parkland, we have to talk about this honestly. This is a racial justice issue. Communities of color suffer from this more than anyone else. We cannot forget that.
Thank you. My niece was a teacher at Parkland High School up until 2 years ago, so this is deeply personal for me in terms of what took place in that school. I have a daughter who is a teacher, and her classroom is the first classroom inside the door. And I think about this all the time. We ought not to be arming our schools with guns. We need to have a sensible gun policy. Here in Massachusetts, we have the lowest gun deaths in the nation, but we are only as safe as our proximity to New Hampshire or to Rhode Island or to anywhere else if we don't have a national policy. I have voted to ban assault weapons back in the early 2000s, to ban trigger cranks and bump stocks after Las Vegas, and most recently to vote for extreme risk protection orders. And let me tell you, I get really nasty letters from people in my district now, and I stand up to them, and that's exactly what whoever goes to Congress will need to do. Thank you.
I will commend you, Barbara, for standing up to those nasty letters, because I have to say, I've noticed, I mentioned Twitter, so throughout the campaign, whenever I've tweeted something or posted something talking about my stance on guns, it's like clockwork, where I get an alert that someone's trying to hack into either my Twitter account or my Facebook account. Fortunately, we have excellent security. This is what happens when a former intel analyst runs for Congress. So I really do commend you for that. And it's just, that's what we're up against. And it's gonna be a fight, but it's a fight I'm ready for.
Look, we see community after community be scarred by gun violence, and this administration continues to be silent. I've seen in my community of Lawrence how the youth have lost their lives to guns. how women who are victims of domestic violence have lost their lives to guns, and there's a lot more we should be doing. We need to mandate universal background checks, ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, close gun show loopholes. No child in this country should fear going to school and being shot. And it's sending a clear message to the NRA that we're not going to allow them to continue to prioritize people's lives, profits over people's lives. And I agree with most of what Alexandra said. I don't agree with the buying back gun program. We've seen in Lawrence where we were trying to implement this program, and there are people who can turn in guns, who have used these guns in crimes, and it's not the most efficient way to address the issue we have in this country. Thank you.
I'll say that the net benefit overall in society, even if there are problems in specific jurisdictions, I just think it's still the right way to go. But another thing I want to mention that we haven't talked about yet is the mental health aspect. Because also we talk about the school shootings, we talk about the epidemic of violence in communities of color, but then it's about the number of suicides by gun. And that this is another aspect of this as a public health issue. The CDC was mentioned. This is an aspect that cannot be ignored in the conversation about reducing gun violence.
Thank you. This is yet another example of the Democrats needing to grow a backbone and fighting back. Because we don't do it enough with this issue, and the lost lives are on us. And we need elected officials who are going to have the guts to finally pass common sense gun safety, much along the lines of what everyone referenced today. In our campaign, and we did that. We found the 10 Republican congresspeople who are in swing districts who are voting the wrong way and are accepting money from the NRA. And we got on the phone and we phone begged them. And we called them. And we should make all of those people famous. And quite frankly, we need to make the bill that enables this reform famous as well. We don't know the name of it, and we need to, and let's rally around it to finally pass common sense gun safety once and for all. And let's get even. Let's get mad about this.
By way of closure, what I'll say is there is very broad agreement on the stage about what to do. What I do think I uniquely offer on this issue is a personal narrative. It matters when you have someone in the room who says, yeah, my son's school in Washington, D.C., here, you can almost see it from the Capitol from a certain angle. That resonates. And it also resonates when you talk about your job being following the tracking of weapons for 12 years. That resonates. So that's what I'll bring to Congress on this issue, and I really look forward to doing it as your Congresswoman.
Very quick question to the panel, just by a show of hands. How many of you are aware that the Secretary of the Treasury this week, or at the end of last week, changed the rules and the NRA no longer has to report who its donors are? And does anyone think that that was a good thing? Smart answers. Ms. Malone, you drew question number 4. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not a FISA question. This lady showed such grace under pressure in the last time I had to question her, and did the smartest thing that anybody I've ever heard answer a question in a political debate and say 3 words: I don't know. Great intelligence, beginning of wisdom. There's been discussion in this campaign as to whether some candidates meet the residency requirement to serve in Congress. Some pointed out that this is while all live within the state, which is required by the Constitution, not all live within the district, which is not required by the Constitution. Do you yourself meet those qualifications to stand for election in the House, and do you think any of your opponents do not? And if not, why not? And do you believe the expressed concerns are in fact important?
I truly believe that I meet the qualification, and here's why. Okay, I do live in Bedford, and it's outside the district. But the rule says, yes, I can run. But here is why I truly believe that I meet. I've been working in the Greater Lowell for over 10 years. I've been hand in hand with all of these families, helping them. I do understand their struggle. I do understand what their needs are. So for over 10 years, I've been a Rotarian in in the district that we serve is the district that we are now, and where I work at Enterprise Bank, and that's our footprint as well. So for over 10 years, this is what I have been doing. I don't believe that I truly believe that you know, if you have worked there, if you have been a part of it, there's nothing wrong, and I do meet the qualification.
Mr. Doss, questions or comments?
This district is in my blood. I started working at my dad's company when I was 12 years old in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Built advanced logistics systems for the U.S. Navy when I was 14. Was an adjunct professor at UMass Lowell in my 20s. Have invested my life savings in Tingsboro, Massachusetts at Stonehenge when we bought it. And I live in downtown Lowell. And my mom has been a professor there at the university for 46 years. This district is in my blood. I'm sure everyone here is qualified. This shouldn't be a question.
Mr. Malone, response?
Yeah, I just so you know what,
You've met the constitutional
Yes.
requirements.
Yes.
And I would like you to clarify one thing.
Yep.
You drew the question, I didn't stick to it.
No, and it's okay, thank you so much, and that's fine, and the thing what I truly would love for all of you to know is that I'm the only candidate that fits a lot of what's going on now. As a refugee, as a mother, as a career person, as a community activist, I've been in the community. I have been working and helping thousands of families get into their homes and building their businesses.
So I'm a Massachusetts boy through and through, without a doubt, but I've been gone for a few years. But I'm proud of what I've done. I worked for President Obama for 10 years, as I said. In the last 4 years, I served the country overseas. And now I live in the district. I live in Concord. My family members have small businesses in the district. My nieces and nephews go to the public schools in the district. I even have my great-great-great-grandfather was actually a congressman in the district back during the Civil War. So yes, we go back really far. But you know what? I do not think that's the big issue here. That we travel around this district, what people care about is advocacy, and they want leadership, and that's what people are going to vote for.
And that's what I've done for over 10 years. I've been advocating for everyone. I've been in this district, as I mentioned before, helping families to get into their homes, building their businesses, and have been working hard. And traveling the same way of the district, I know that working families need someone like them to advocate for them, not someone who are elites, and someone that can be like them. And that's what I have been doing for over 10 years, and that's what I will continue to do in Congress or wherever I'm at. That's in my blood. It's in my DNA.
Very simple. I live in Andover and I live in the district, and I don't think there's any disqualification for living outside the district if it's constitutionally allowed. So, simple answer for me.
Anything right now?
We're good for now.
All right, Mr. Golden, do you have a question?
Just a comment. I grew up in Massachusetts. I've lived in this district 30 years. I don't think there should be barriers in terms of people running for office if they meet the constitutional requirements and if they have the passion and interest to serve in Congress. I think it's fine. I think Boca has shown, she has an interest and a passion, and a lot of the issues that are going on go beyond just one district. They concern Massachusetts, they concern the country. So I think it's great to have people coming in and running and bringing different points of view, and I think it's perfectly fine for both to be running.
Anything you want to add to that, Ms. Muller? Okay, next person to question or respond is Mr. Han, I think.
I can attest to this field of candidates. Everyone's working really, really hard. We've been at it for 10 months, and traveling all over the district, getting to know every corner of the district. And there's a hard-working group of people. Look, I often say that I lived in this district my whole life, and you know what? That gives me a little bit of an advantage because, you know, I know some more people and I've maybe lived in the community for a little bit longer. But the voters ultimately decide. And you know what? I'm proud to serve on this ballot with everyone here. They've all worked hard to get on the ballot, and I trust you all to determine who's going to be the best representative of this Congress.
So, I just want you to know that I never thought of being a politician. Okay, so growing up, coming here as a refugee, I was always told to stay out of politics because what happened in Cambodia. And when Congresswoman Tsongas announced her retirement, my heart just couldn't stop beating. And the more that I thought about it, the more that I felt that this is a great chance to be able to help everyone on a broader level. So let me ask you this. Do you want a representative that have been there all this time, helping you, living the life that you've had and understanding you? Or do you want someone,
Go ahead and finish that.
That's okay.
Finish that.
Or do you want someone that hasn't really been there?
All right, Mr. Brown, question or comment? Oh, wait, I'm sorry, who got this?
Ooh, here we go, Alexander.
Oh, it is.
Who's next?
I'm sorry, it is Alexander. I screwed up. Don't go far, Bob.
I'll stay close.
I live in Haverhill. Haverhill is within the district. It's almost in New Hampshire, but it is still in Massachusetts. And I live in Haverhill. My parents live in Haverhill. My parents are right there. And the reason I also want to offer up the reason why after the election I moved back to Haverhill, is simply we wanted to be near them because I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, and frankly, with no family down there, it was getting a little lonely, and we were thinking of having our 3rd child. So we decided to move home. This was the farthest thing from our plans in March and April of last year when we started telling our bosses and all that kind of thing. So that's my story and how I came to be here very improbably.
I just want to tell you, I live a mile away from Carlisle, which is in the district. When elected, I will move in. And the reason why Bedford is not in the district is the gerrymandering. And that's why, so.
I screwed up with her before.
No worries, no worries. So, my dad grew up in Lawrence. He worked in the mills, and that was his hometown. He was able to go to college by virtue of the GI Bill after serving in World War II. His dad behind him came down from Canada, from Quebec, and enlisted in World War I and served and became a naturalized citizen. So my dad's family comes from Lawrence. My mom's family landed in Lowell and made their way down to Lawrence. So it was our hometown. For my mom, it was Methuen. For my dad, it was Lawrence. Came back 50 years ago, 1967. So I've lived here for 51 years in the district, represented the district over the last 15 years.
Anything else on the right now? You have a comment?
Yes.
Okay, I was going to see if she had anything to say. Okay, go ahead.
I moved to this district in 1992 with my family to Haverhill, Massachusetts, and I am a product of this district. And every opportunity I've had, from college to then after law school, I've always returned back to be of service. Whether it was being a social worker in Lowell, Lawrence, and Haverhill, or defending children from deportation after law school, I've showed my commitment with my track record that I want to be of service to this district. I think that constitutionally is not a problem, but I also think that voters have a choice to see who have actually dedicated their life to public service and making sure that this community is moving forward. And I hope that you learn more about my background. Thank you.
So So I've dedicated my life to the community. I wasn't even being paid. My full-time job was at Enterprise Bank, and I'm on a leave of absence. And for over 20 years, I've been giving back to every organization. I've served on Lowell General Hospital, Middlesex Community College, Girls Inc., Women Working Wonders, just to name a few. When a horrible fire happened in Lowell, I helped to raise $260,000 for them to get back on their feet. When Lowell needs money to do system change work, I helped to get $500,000 for the city. When Middlesex needs money, I helped to get $1.7 million. I didn't live there, but I did it because people need help. And that's important.
Thank you. My family has lived the American dream in this district, and not only did I grow up in the district, but it's literally an environment that is the opposite of what Donald Trump is doing today. It was an inclusive America where my great-grandfather could come from Lebanon and work his mills and work his way up, have a son who served in the military and opened up a small business that's run by my mom and her two brothers today, and my dad, a Korean American, getting married at St. Augustine's Church in 1981 to a Lebanese American woman, and to have a Korean Lebanese guy have a chance to be a congressman from his hometown district. That is America, and that is the American dream. And why I'm running is because Donald Trump is fighting very much against that value of inclusivity. Instead, he's ripping families apart and making people less welcome, and I take that personally.
As I mentioned when I first started, I'm very blessed to be alive. And I really thank all of you, and I really thank America for offering us a lifeline, because if it wasn't for that, I could have been dead. And I think it's important that with many blessings and with many opportunities, you have a lot of responsibilities. And that is not to care only giving because you're paid or because it's because you're home or whatever. It's giving because you know it's the right thing to do. And as I mentioned, it's been in my DNA. That's what I want to do, is to be able to offer everyone the same opportunity to achieve their American dream the way that I had.
Ms. Malone, do you mind if I ask you just one question on something you said earlier?
Yes.
Since you have fled a tyrannical country as a child, do you find many people who are in this country now who have fled other countries that have tyrannical governments are reluctant to become involved in politics and government because of their experiences?
Yes, of course. Yes, and that's why we... Yes, because of what happened in their home countries and what the consequences. My parents witnessed their families and friends being murdered and killed. And due to the fact that they spoke up, they looked like they were educated people. And these weren't right. But the thing is, when they come to this country, the reason why they're afraid and they're not being civically engaged is not because that they don't want to and they don't care. They do. When you talk to them, they really want an opportunity. But the thing is, they're afraid of my mother, who has been here for 30 years now, still thinks she lives in Cambodia. And I'm doing this. She's so afraid for me. She's like, do not speak up. And every time I'm on stage, I have this, I sometimes feel like and that's what you have, and that's what is going on right now. And that's what we need to help people with. We need to, it's not who we are. And I thank you all so much for having given me that opportunity. I know it's not you, but it's people like you who have given me the opportunity. And I thank you very much, because if it wasn't for people like you who opened your door to us and taught us, we wouldn't be where we are today. And I have been given back, and I would love a chance to give everyone that same opportunity, because it's the right thing to do.
I hope the candidates will forgive and indulge me on that one. I thought next question goes to Ms. Littell. Ready? Okay. The Constitution gives the ability to control all aspects of federal elections to the Congress. Should the Congress, including you if duly elected, use these provisions and precedents to prevent states from passing rules and regulations which in fact are used as tools of voter suppression, e.g. expand voting hours, allow or expand early voting, rescind laws requiring burdensome, obscure, and inconsistent rules for voters, etc., or allow other voters' participation, broadening ideas, etc.
You know, our country was founded on the ideal of allowing people to come in and express themselves through voting, and it seems we've come so far from that. It seems that Democrats understand the need for all to be actively engaged and to be able to vote, and Republicans seem hell-bent on trying to figure out ways in which we can keep people from participating. And it's seen in action in different states in different ways, right? Historically, we had poll taxes. I remember watching a show where there was a woman who went in on a weekly basis down south trying to pass a test so that she could be allowed to vote, an African-American woman. That's wrong. We still have those problems now when we have things like very limited hours of people being able to vote, when we have not enough machines that are available so that people have to queue up and wait in lines, particularly when we had historic elections like the Barack Obama presidential election. We have problems, and we are limiting and excluding people when we are, well, look at, we had George Bush because of the fact that the hanging chads in Florida, right? You know, what would have happened? What course would our country have taken had we gone the right way on that? I personally believe that we need to abolish the Electoral College. We've seen what's happened in 2 recent presidential elections where we've had the popular vote be entirely the different story and outcome of the president that we ended up naming. So I think all of those things ought to be considered.
I'll be quick. I think this election is a good example. It's going to be the day after Labor Day, right? That's going to suppress voter turnout. So the legislature should have funded early voting on this one because more people could get out and vote. And so voter suppression happens in all sorts of different ways. We will have worked alongside all of you who have stayed late to watch this. Work pretty hard to figure out who you want to support and what your values are and how a little bit unfortunate with
We had a supplemental budget right before we passed our annual budget in the state senate, and I was able to pass a piece of legislation to do just that. I was going to set up early voting for the Monday and Friday prior to our September 4th election in an attempt to be certain that everyone would be able to get out and vote. We ratified in November. It was put into place 2 years ago, but I tried to get this into a supplemental budget, thought it was all set, and then was working on funding for it in our annual budget, only to find that we could not get the House to agree to it, and the measure was taken out. So I absolutely agree that in terms of this particular election cycle, it's going to be such a low turnout. We do a great disservice by not allowing for early voting.
I would advocate for absolutely every single thing that we possibly can do in order to expand access to voting. Hands down, no questions asked. I think it's, as I said earlier, it's a real threat to democracy that we see the turnout numbers. If you think about it, the 2014 elections, the last midterm election, we had, I believe it was a 36% turnout nationally. We've just got to turn that around, and that means access to voting. When I worked in the Obama administration, we worked on things like early voting in states like Ohio and Florida and North Carolina, where people were voting on weekends, where people could had better access to absentee ballots, etc., and of course eliminating voter ID checks. But I have to say, usually Massachusetts leads the way. Not on this. We are behind on this one, and we need to do a lot more.
We just passed an automatic voter registration bill that's long overdue in the state. We can and must do better, but what that means now is that when anyone is intersecting with our state government, they will automatically be registered to vote. It won't be an opt-in, it will be an opt-out. And so more people will be signed up and able to be registered. But of course, the bigger issue beyond registration is compelling people to get involved, to want to believe in something, to want to participate. That we need to work on, as well as automatic voter registration.
My first experience in politics was as an 18-year-old, and unions were very interested in a candidate in my congressional district, and I saw them registering voters and getting them to the polls, and I said, there's nothing wrong with American politics that can't be fixed by more participation. But my whole life, like my whole life with the labor movement, has been in decline. 2014, as Rufus mentioned, was the nadir. That was the lowest in 72 years of participation in that election. So I think it has something to do with 60% of House Democrats voted for a defense bill, $57 billion more than Donald Trump asked for. Now what was that about? That was currying favor with defense contractors. There's no other explanation for it. Half of our delegation voted for that. Half of the Massachusetts delegation.
One of the ways in which I believe that we can engage people, and I really saw it on the ground in my state Senate district, certainly after the President Trump was sworn in, we had the Women's March, and there was great energy and involvement. Long before I ever knew that this congressional seat was coming up, last May, a year ago May, I invited people to an activist forum, and we brought in a number of different issue groups: environment, education, the transgender rights issue, LGBTQ, etc., and just brought them in to present on what they were working on and to allow people to feel a sense of connectedness so that they could take their passion and direct it in the way in which they felt most comfortable. But I think it's that sense of activism and engagement that we need to do.
A couple of years ago, the Supreme Court of the United States overthrew the 1965 Voting Rights Bill, arguably the most successful civil rights legislation, the most successful voting rights legislation in the history of this country. And the reasoning, according to these geniuses on the court, was Congress didn't intend for these issues to apply to today's world. Well, the issues may be a little different in the not poll taxes or literacy test, but they are about voter ID, and it's the same problem. If I'm elected to Congress, one of the first things I want to do is get a new 1965 type voting rights, civil rights legislation passed to protect voting rights of minorities and everybody else, and let's end this nonsense of voter suppression.
I'm just going to say amen to that, because we all need to be doing that. Thank you for saying that.
Mr. Head.
I'm going to continue dreaming that little dream that Rufus gave us. In the last midterm election, it was 36% turnout. And just think if that had been more. We would have kept control of the Senate. Mitch McConnell wouldn't have been the leader. And Merrick Garland would be on the bench of the Supreme Court. We have to do everything in our power to get people out to vote. And you know what? We're not doing enough. We talk about automatic voter registration and same-day registration, but this Congress needs to be thinking about more innovative ways to get more people out and exercising our most important right in this country. And we're going to run out of things to talk about on getting voter turnout, so I'm going to give the panel a little gift and say, let's start talking about how Congress should be securing our elections against another foreign attack.
That's a huge issue. I think that we need to understand, we have a president that is so focused on our border to the south. He's not thinking at all and disconnecting himself from reality in terms of Russia. We have been under attack, right? Our last election was under attack. We need to acknowledge that, and we need to speak up loud and clear to say that we cannot go through another election cycle with tampering like that. But it begins with all of us speaking loud and clear and engaging in this issue and pushing back and not acknowledging the half-truths and the falsities that this president peddles every single day.
Pick up this thread. I was there in the intelligence community when the reports were coming in about the Russian interference in their elections. You will have no stronger advocate for secure elections from Russian interference in Congress. And I saw what they tried to do to our allies. So I will take that issue on head on. And one specific way to solve it, well, not solve it, but partially address it when it comes to election systems, auditable paper trails for all of our election machines. Now, what we do is we secure it on that end, but then automatic voter registration, early voting, make election day a holiday, because this is about not just all of us, it's hard to vote, but what about the most vulnerable, the profoundly disabled, the people working 3 jobs, the poor, the homeless? They can never get into vote, and that skews our elections. We have to recognize that, right?
You know, I think that we need to be caring about all these issues, but it really isn't just us, it's all of you. It's all of you getting out there and becoming engaged. It's all of you speaking up with a loud and clear voice, having conversations with your neighbors, making sure that they all get engaged in this election cycle. You know, some of you may have come tonight to make a decision on who you're going to support in the race. Once you make that decision, whoever that may be, I hope that you do get actively engaged and help us as we try to get out and reach our 735,000 people in our district. Help us, pick up a clipboard, go door to door with us, and talk about your candidate, whoever that may be, and why you want them to go to Congress. That is how we're going to rebuild trust. That is how we are going to rebuild a strong Democratic Party. Thank you.
I think we have a lot of walls than not. You know, I'm for the automatic registration, and I would go beyond that instead of making the deadline August 15th to just have it be on that date as well. Because in registering people to vote, I find that you know, it's a hassle to be doing everything and helping to register and then going door to door and doing this. It's you know, it's been nice to be able to educate people and say and let them know why it matters and registering them right away. And I've also worked at this for a number of years in making sure that it's in different languages so they can understand what those questions mean and who they're voting for and why.
I think that, you know, there are some wonderful things happening here in Massachusetts, and it might be a model for, you know, down in Washington. There are groups that actively study ballot initiative questions and put out great information and give people really an opportunity to make thoughtful considerations. You know, I think that we can do more of that in terms of educating people on the issues that are up for voting down in Congress. I feel like there's very little attention paid to that. When people cast a vote, we are not seeing those votes. You occasionally see what happens in the papers on our state votes, but there's more that can be done to make sure that people are educated on what's happening down in Congress.
Look, we absolutely need to expand people's access to voting rights. I was proud to support the automatic voter registration in Massachusetts, which we just passed in the House, and there's a lot we need to be doing. We need to start implementing civic education in our public schools. We voted in this in the Massachusetts State House and passed it. Critically important to get millennials and young voters engaged. We need to hold Russia accountable for their intermeddling in our elections and post-act sanctions, improve our cybersecurity. We also need to recognize something that a lot of people aren't recognizing. Every year, about 1 million people who are permanent residents are eligible to become citizens. And currently, it takes 16 months to be able to get through that process. When Obama was in office, it only took 6 months. That is an impediment for people's access to become citizens and get engaged in the electoral process. All of these things need to happen, and I'd be happy to advocate and fight on behalf of these issues. Thank you.
Another thing that I was able to do in the state senate was a millennial forum, and I absolutely agree. I'm the mother of 4 millennials, so I'm obviously not a millennial myself, but I have 4 millennials, and we did a millennial listening tour in the Senate, and I was able to bring them to Lawrence, and we were able to have live translations, so we had bilingual opportunity for young people to talk about what they cared about, what we needed to work on. It's that kind of visioning that we need to do at every age to make sure that people feel like they're being heard, they're being listened to, and that, you know, we can set agendas that are going to help real people.
I don't think it can be said enough that this starts at the top. We have a president who refuses to admit that a foreign entity meddled in our elections, and instead of sanctions, as has been suggested, he invites him to the frickin' White House. That's the problem we have, is at the top, we have a president who doesn't believe in integrity of elections. That's the biggest thing first and foremost. As a former chief of staff to a city, all of these ideas are fantastic, but quite frankly, you need the funding for good elections departments to be able to do all of these things. And all of this is interrelated. We just talked about gun control. Governor Baker announced $75 million for better school security. That's great, but we shouldn't have to do that. We should have common sense gun reform in this country, and maybe that money could go to more election machines, to better regulations, to more things that would allow more access. That is the problem right now, is our priorities, and we need to fight back first and foremost at the top of this president who believes more in palling around with Russia than to help empower people with their voting rights.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've pretty much exhausted the conversation. But what I will say is this, I lit up a little bit with President Trump yesterday morning. And I think that we need to do more of that, right? We do need to challenge him. My dad was an FBI agent. I'm sure he's turning over in his grave at the very notion of what just happened in Helsinki last week. We can and must do better. We are a better nation than this. We need open, free, and fair elections where everyone from the most physically fit person to, as Alexander was talking about, our intellectually and developmentally and physically disabled people and elderly can participate. Participation is key. Thank you.
Ms. Matias, you drew question 15, your assistant. You get even with me later. Okay. How would you fix the problems currently plaguing the Department of Veterans Affairs? Would you opt for or oppose or seek a middle ground on privatization?
Thank you for the question. So I think the first issue we need to tackle when it comes to the Department of Veteran Affairs is that we're not employing people, and we don't have a department that's actually providing veterans who sacrifice their lives for this country, the resources they need. I've been proud in the Massachusetts State House to lead on this issue and file a lot of earmarks and budgetary proposals that bring resources. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a couple of constituents calling my office about we don't have access to transportation to our VA medical appointments in Boston and Bedford. How can you provide assistance? And I was able to secure over $25,000 that would secure a vehicle that will be placed in our local office in Lawrence and ensure that our veterans who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country have access to the medical services they need. And as a country, I think we need to improve that overall, ensure that every veteran has access to the medical services and insurance they need. I think we also need to consider the fact that we have a president who is not willing to invest and ensure that it's well-staffed. So it's about how do we get that department well-staffed so that veterans across this country are getting the services they need. These are things that I'm happy to advocate once given the opportunity to represent you in Congress. And I yield the floor because I feel we're going to be discussing this for a while. So.
All right. Go ahead.
You guys are troopers, by the way. This is unbelievable. Look, I think as a country, we don't do enough for our veterans. That's clear, right? We have a major issue with homelessness, mental illness, PTSD, all of these things for the bravest amongst us that are willing to service abroad. The VA is only one bit of the problem that we need to solve in Congress, and I'm sure all of us feel the same way on that, on how poorly we do and that we need to do better.
I concur.
Ultimately, I think this is a question about leadership and funding. So I think we confirmed the new VA administrator today or yesterday, I believe. I lose track of my days, admittedly. But I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is the 4th or 5th VA secretary confirmed just in the last several of years, that is a failure of leadership as far as I'm concerned. I do not think that we should be blaming the rank and file men and women who work at the VA for this, but this is a lack of political leadership. That is what's plaguing the VA right now. And lastly, I tell you, it's so much about funding and it's about resources. And with a lack of political leadership comes lack of advocacy for resources. A great democracy should be judged based on the way it protects the people who have fought and died for their country.
And at a point that we should definitely make sure that we're investing more in housing. One of the most critical things a veteran who's coming from abroad needs is stable housing, right? After stable housing, access to employment, access to mental health services and substance abuse services. So in order to do that, we need to make sure that they have the best medical care, access to the best medical insurance, and I don't think we're doing enough as a country to do that. Yield the floor to the next person.
I spent 2012 and 2013, a full year with our troops in Afghanistan, about 100 miles south of Kabul. And I feel for these folks, really. I mean, I saw the burn pits that a lot of them who tended those burn pits tried to get compensation from the contractor that made them ill, and they lost. In a federal court, they lost. There's a registry in the Congress. Well, what good would that do them? So we need resources, you're right. 45 cents spent at the IRS yields $100 in revenue. 45 cents. And we've been cutting the IRS for years, for 10 years. The Republicans don't want to collect taxes. I think we got to collect taxes, and I think the opioid abuse amongst our veterans is a scar that will last for a very long time. And I think there's a precedent set by the tobacco settlement, $264 billion. You all remember that. I think we can do the same to the pharmaceutical company.
I think that's a great point, brings up opiates, and in Massachusetts, our rates doubled that of the national average in terms of deaths, and there's a lot more we should be doing. I think we need to support Senator Warren's CARE Act, which would invest $10 billion over the next 10 years to ensure that the communities that are being affected by this are actually getting the resources they need. We need to make sure that people have access to prevention, treatment beds, outpatient services that are long-term. Addiction is a long-term issue, and we need to make sure people have that long-term access to services. So I think it's a great point, and I yield the floor to the next person.
Please try to remember to stay as close. I know the topics will lead on to other topics, but do try to stay on the general question.
We certainly need to make sure that our veterans are getting the best health care, and things need to be monitored to make sure that that's done efficiently. But we need to do more than just heal the body, because there are other concerns and issues that our veterans have as well. They need good mental health services, they need good services for post-traumatic stress, for opioid addiction, for vocational training, and actually what we need to do for our veterans is what was done for veterans after the Second World War. There needs to be a new GI Bill of Rights for veterans to be able to go to college and have the support of the government, because that was one of the most tremendous successes that this country had, all those veterans getting the benefit of a GI Bill of Rights, and it helps the country as well as helps the veterans themselves.
And in order to get us to ensure that every veteran who comes from abroad has access to excellent health care, we need a single-payer healthcare system. We need to think about a universal healthcare system that ensures that every person in this country, regardless of your economic standing, has access to the care they need so that they can live a dignified, healthy, and productive life. We need to make sure that Medicaid and Medicare and CHIP are expanded, not cut down, and all these are things that I will fight for if given the opportunity to represent you.
Our spending priorities in Washington, they're completely out of whack. I think we feel it every day, right? Whether you're a senior citizen who can't afford your medicine, or if you're a veteran who served our country and you're going to a VA hospital, you're feeling that pinch. One of the things that I got to see was down in Washington, there were a bunch of members who would go to Walter Reed facility, which was a beautiful facility, and treated our best world-class care for our veterans. But not many of those same members would go back to their district. They became way too detached from the facilities that were actually serving districts in their home districts. And that's what we need. We need to send new leaders down to Washington who are totally attached and accountable to the people that they're there to serve.
Yes, I'm gonna pass to Dan.
Well, it's actually Ms. Chandler.
Oh, sorry.
So, working for Naval Intelligence for 13 years, I know a lot of officers enlisted who were intel analysts in their day jobs, but then were reservists sent to Iraq and Afghanistan, came back forever physically changed and mentally changed. And to the original question, I reject any privatization of the VA because the VA has competencies in post-traumatic stress care and traumatic injury care that you can't find in the private sector. And to be clear, healthcare is a right, it's not a commodity, and it's all the more so when it comes to vets. What we need to do is increase the ability of vets to access community health centers when the wait times in the VA system are too long. We need to increase capacity in the system, and specialty care for women and for LGBT people, others that are newly in combat roles in other situations, is way lagging in the VA. I was hearing about that in the air just the other day.
Are you waving?
I'm waving, yes.
All right, then we will go to Ms. Latanya. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Malone, you're right. Wrong line, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank my volunteer, Tim, who's a veteran. And whoever's a veteran in this room, I really want to thank you. The sacrifice that you made for us, and because you risked your life for us, we should be taking care of you and your families. So I know that Congresswoman Tsongas has been a proponent of this, and she has done a wonderful job. So I would continue to make sure that we stand up for our veterans and fully fund everything that they need of what everyone is saying, and go beyond that to help their families as well. Thank you.
I do believe that we need to have a strong veterans healthcare system. I do not believe it should be privatized. I think we do have a capacity issue. I think that people are being given good care to the greatest extent possible, but we do not have enough practitioners in the veterans hospitals, and that's when you see these long wait times, which are unacceptable. In the short run, I do think we need to figure out a way that we can allow people, and if they live too far from a veterans facility, the ability to access care closer, but I do not in any way condone privatization. I do agree, and actually was part of a working group a few years ago around ways here in Massachusetts that we can help better provide transportation to our VA hospitals, and also worked very closely with both the Veterans Outreach Center in Haverhill and on the ground in Lawrence with trying to provide supports and services to those veterans in the district.
You?
Okay, Mr. Coe.
Thank you very much. I think it's once again there's an issue that starts at the top. Perhaps this is one area where President Trump is most full of it. He claims that he's for veterans and taking care of our vets, but he's much more excited about funding a parade for himself, or quite frankly, the defense budget, as Jeff talks about, that calls for increasing our nuclear arsenal, instead of actually giving the resources necessary to protect and help our veterans. If you talk to veterans, some of them really like their VA and it works well, others don't. It's that consistency that is the problem. So we need to take that money that's going to this bloated defense budget and actually give it to the people who actually need it. As far as privatization goes, that not only needs to be off the table for the VA, but for Social Security and Medicare too, because they are going for that every single day, and we need to stand up against this privatization.
Yes, I think that the direction we should be moving with the VA is privatizing it. It's about ensuring we're fully staffing it, ensuring that we have the leadership we need in there to get veterans across this country access to the services and resources they need. Given the opportunity to be a voice for you, I'll make sure that this is a priority for me in Congress. Thank you.
Believe it or not, you have done in 1 hour when it took us 2 hours and some odd minutes for the first half.
That's because we protested before that.
Yeah, we
Last question. Although I will ask Ms. Matias one thing. What was your feeling about the decision of the president to order all, or I think it was all of, enlistees who were not citizens, which we have a long tradition of doing, to be fired and not allowed to finish their contracts in order to become citizens. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we have a president who's demonstrated who he's racist and has been presenting a divisive agenda in our country. We have undocumented immigrants in this country who've made the ultimate sacrifice, who've protected our country against foreign threats, and we should be appreciative of that. And I think it's immoral, it's shameful, it's disgusting that he would propose such a proposal. And I think what we should be doing is figuring out how we in this country give access to TPS holders to have access to citizenship, dreamers, the 11 million undocumented immigrants that live in this country. And these are things that I would fight for if given the opportunity to represent you. I've been leading in the Massachusetts State House on the Safe Communities Act, and I think he's demonstrated he's incompetent and unfit to hold office.
Thank you. Is there any disagreement on this?
No disagreement. I was just point of clarification. The people he kicked out of the army were legal, they were legally in this country. It makes it all the more shameful.
Yeah, they were still not citizens, but they were legally
That's
within the
correct.
country. That's correct. Okay. Last question. Hi, Dan.
What's up?
The end is nigh. Don't blame me. Your assistant picked your question for you. You got question number 1. It basically deals with the concept that money is speech and the removal of any limitations on spending in political races. Citizens United is the name of the case. It's notorious. And the Democratic Party has taken a very strong position against that removal. What is your view of Citizens United? Have you received and accepted any large donations? How do you reconcile your feelings on Citizens United with your campaign practices?
Thank you, and thank you everyone for sticking around for so long. I really appreciate everyone's patience. First of all, we need to end Citizens United. We talk a lot about constitutional amendments or other things, whatever is faster. We need to get dark money out of politics. We have a practice now where corporations or people with special interests, without ever being public about it, can literally swing a race one way or the other. And that's quite frankly just a tremendous concern in this country. But we gotta go beyond that, right? Citizens United is a problem, but we need to move to publicly financed elections in this country. There is an amazing Government for the People Act that many of you may know about. It basically allows for a government match on low-dollar donations. And I am incredibly and full-heartedly for that publicly financed election system, because the reality is, the one thing that I know every single person on this stage can agree with me on is that the current system is totally messed up. We spend way too much of our time on the current system, and the fact that we have to spend time raising money when we should have to be out there every single day is a huge problem, is a symbol of the flaw in this election system. So we need to get to publicly financed elections. I'm also honored to have the endorsement of Senator Russ Feingold, who was the architect of campaign finance reform with a number of other people in Congress. And I see that as a validation of this mission, that we need to change the system once and for all.
Mr. Doss, question or comment?
Thank you. I like Dan. Dan's a great guy, and I think he has a bright future in American politics. But I think to hear that from him is almost hypocritical, because unfortunately, there's the establishment, and they raise money very quickly and easily, and from all over the United States in a way that is unusual for a small district. The people of this district should be represented by people who care about this district, number one, and listen, right? When we talk to big donors and advocate on their behalf to the people in this district, I think we do a disservice. Money needs to be out of politics, and there's a lot of it that's been raised on this side of the dais.
Mr. Cole?
Yeah. Is this our last word for him?
It will be, but he has rejoined to him.
Yeah, I think he waived. Yeah. Yes, thank you. I'm fully and completely in favor of taking down Citizens United. I think this is an enormous threat to democracy. And I'm actually working with an organization in the 3rd District called America's Promise that is actually trying to do just that. But I think we're all going to agree on that, to be honest with you. So I'm going to focus on a couple more things in my 30 seconds left. What you're going to hear from my campaign, we hear a lot of Trump bashing on the stage, and I promise you, I love to Trump bash privately. But I don't do it as much publicly. And why is that? Because I think it's critically important that our party stands for something and not just against it. And our party, the future of our party, if we're going to win back hearts and minds, that's what we got to do. And last thing I'm going to say, look, I desperately think we need more diplomacy in politics. So I very much hope that you support a former diplomat to be your next congressperson. Thank you, sir.
Every single thing we talked about tonight, the fight for universal health care, for fighting for gun rights, all of the things that we see going wrong in this country is because we have a president who does not believe in what we believe, who believes in un-American values. That's why I think it's so important to have someone in Congress who will constantly stand up to this president and fight back, to fight for a single-payer healthcare system, to fight for things like a $15 minimum wage and making sure that everyone has access to good quality, affordable care. That should be central, I believe, to any candidate who wants to be in this race, standing up to President Trump because he is taking our country in the fundamentally undemocratic direction.
Well, I respectfully disagree. The problem is not Donald Trump. The problem is Democrats that can't differentiate themselves from Republicans because the money comes from the same feeding trough. They are beholden to the same banks, the same insurance companies, and the same Wall Street firms. That's the reason we have stagnation in Congress, stagnation in wages, union busting. We can't do the things we'd like to do, and progressive would like to do, because we don't have leaders in the Democratic Party that will stand up and say, this is the end of our party if we can't refuse banks and insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies money. It's the death of our party, folks.
I see a very different leader we had just a few years ago, President Obama, who took us a different direction, who fought for the things that matter, who stood for the values that we believe in. He is a very different leader with a different set of values than this president. He is starkly different, and we need to fight back against him every day, and we can never normalize the behavior we see. Every single day, he says something more crazy than the day before that makes us forget about the crazy thing he said the day before, and we can never normalize this behavior.
Well, I think that Citizens United is an absurd decision that basically says money equals free speech. So that means if you have $1 million, you get $1 million worth of more free speech than somebody with $1, and that's absurd. And we do need to go in the direction of public financing to get big money out of politics, but we also as Democrats need to set that example. Now I, for example, am not accepting any corporate money. I sit on a planning board where there are people who I could easily ask for money, lawyers, developers. I do not believe it's proper or fair to accept money from business interests that are coming before a board that you represent. So I think as Democrats, we need to set that example and fight for public financing. As I indicated before, one good way of establishing that is getting free airtime from broadcasting companies.
Mr. Cove? All right, Ms. Jen? Ms. Grant?
I know the order So we must end Citizens United. I was part of the original team, the legislative team, who helped co-author and usher that bill through a Republican Congress. The me and Shays, McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform of 2002. There's plenty more that this Congress can do to take money out of politics, but it does start here. We're really proud of how we raise money on this campaign trail. We raise the majority of our contributions from people who live here in this district. We don't take corporate PAC money, and our campaign is not funded by special interest lobbyists or Beacon Hill lobbyists or Bank of America or what have you. We stand for cleaning up our elections.
Big money is the enemy of big ideas. Big ideas like living wage for all, childcare, healthcare, low cost, accessible to everyone. Big ideas that we all on this stage believe in. The problem is when people get to Congress with the best intentions, if you're fueled by big money, you hit a wall. And that's why I'm proud to say, my median donation for our campaign, $27. So let there be no doubt of who will have sent me to Congress if I get there. And I alone on this stage have signed a contract committing me to resign from Congress if I don't introduce this legislation when I get there within a year of it. So I will bring that determination. I'm ready for the fight against big money. I've tackled bigger struggles in my life, I promise you. So I would be honored to have your support and your vote on September 4th.
I think money in campaigns and election, it's a threat to our democracy. It's basically, you leave many population that doesn't have a voice, that still won't have a voice because they don't have the money to pay to play. And the thing is, none of us have a backbone, honestly. I love President Obama, but he had a chance to change that too, but he didn't. And the thing is that, you know what? If we are not brave enough to elect normal people, just like you and me, we're never gonna get there. We're gonna have people that are tied to big money. Now, when you're tied to money, when decisions are made, do you think that people are gonna be thinking about how you're living and what you went through? I don't think so.
Mr. Coe? Okay. Ms. Latanya?
I was happy to cast a vote a couple of weeks ago for the We the People Act here in the Massachusetts legislature. It states that, we should be putting Congress on notice, we should be overturning Citizens United. That said, I think that we have to change the way we run campaigns and elections radically. The fact that viability, the test for which is how many millions of dollars you've raised, is outrageous. Particularly when how you get that money, what your connections are, who your contacts, who your daddy is. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? And so viability should never be equated with how much money you have in the bank. It ought to be about bold, big ideas, a record of accomplishment, and vision. And that's what this needs to be about. It's playing out in this very race, folks. This isn't just happening elsewhere. It's happening here in this race.
Mr. Coe?
Look, as a woman of color and an immigrant, the biggest challenge and obstacle in my race has been the raising of money. And it's disgusting that when you meet with an organization or you're talking to someone who you're trying to convince, they want to know whether you can raise money. This is about public service. This is about your commitment to making a change and an impact in people's lives for the better. That should be the parameter of what we're gauging people's commitment, and that's not the case. So I'm all for the public financing of elections. We need to repeal Citizens United, and until we do not do this, we're not going to be electing the best public servant. We're going to be electing the person who's most well-connected, who has access to funds and resources, and that just simply should not be the case. So I will be a strong advocate against this because it's really keeping our country back. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone for being here. I think we need new leaders in DC who are not afraid to stand up to President Trump and fight for the values that make the American dream possible. When I was Chief of Staff to Mayor Walsh, we doubled down and said, if you pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement, we will be carbon neutral by 2050. When this president instituted a racist travel ban, one that would have prevented my family from coming here 100 years ago, we said that documents or not, you are welcome in City Hall and we will protect you because that is the American thing to do. Finally, accessibility is the most important thing. My cell phone number is 978-225-7455. Call me today, call me tomorrow, and call me if I'm fortunate enough to get elected, and I will always return your phone call. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Here endeth the reading of the word. I don't usually give sermons this long, but I didn't call on the congregation, those they called on themselves, for which I actually am glad. I want to remind you, a lot of us are very angry, upset, distressed. These are the times, that timer don't work on me. As one gentleman said many years ago, these are the times that drive insult. In the Lincoln-Douglas debate, just one last historical note and I'll close. Those two men debated each other in 6 different locations, 2 hours at a time, responding to the crowds and to each other. Today, we're much put upon if we spend more than 5 minutes doing something to get our information. You are to be congratulated for spending 3 hours and 30 minutes getting into here tonight. Thank you.
Have a nice trip.
All set.
How did that go?
My arm's tired.
Oh my God.